IB Nation, welcome to a special, actually, it's not a special edition. The topic is going to make it seem like a special edition, but just to another edition of the Irish Breakdown, Notre Dame Recruiting Hour. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. And Ryan, it was quite a weekend. It was quite a weekend. It was not a good weekend for Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint. Simple as that. Yesterday, obviously, we found out that Justin Scott committed to Ohio State, which meant not only did Notre Dame not finish second for Justin Washington, it's arguable if they were even third for Justin Scott, huge loss, not incredibly unexpected. We talked last week, if he doesn't make it back, if he makes a decision in July, it's not going to be Notre Dame. We've been saying that for a while.
Yeah.
And the fact is he just was completely unwilling to visit campus. So the writing has been on the wall. Notre Dame just flat got beat, and a lot of drop balls here, and we'll get into that a little bit. Obviously, Isaiah Canyon decommitted from Notre Dame. We had a show we put out on Saturday, a little special edition show I put out on Saturday, kind of explaining what happened. And then today commits to Georgia Tech. So, kind of gives some credence to the whole didn't want to go far away from home thing, although I still believe there's a little more to it than that, but no need to dwell on that. He's not coming here. So that obviously went down this weekend. We did get some good news, you and I, kind of talking to some different sources about some directions that some recruitments are trending in the 25 class and the 24 class. So, but today we're going to focus, Ryan. Look, we got to cover it, right? I don't want to have a negative show. It's July 3rd. We're going to have July 4th tomorrow. Was in a good mood yesterday. Went out to dinner with my wife, relaxing, having a nice, good day, and then all of a sudden, boom, that news happens. And, to some people, the sky is falling. And look, it was we're not going to sit here and spin it, Ryan. There's no way to spin it. Losing Justin Scott, that stung. So we'll dive into that. We'll dive into Isaiah Canyon. We'll update the latest with recruiting for Notre Dame, obviously. And then we've got an interview with 2025 running back Justin Thurman that we'll get into a little bit today as well, Ryan. So you had a chance to sit down with Justin and talk to him one-on-one. I had a chance to watch Justin work out this summer. He was obviously one of the standouts at Notre Dame's Irish Invasion. So we'll get a chance to talk to Justin about that as well. So we do have some good news to talk about today, obviously. And then, of course, at the end of the day, Ryan, we'll jump into the mailbag. But look, first things first, Notre Dame misses out on Justin Scott. It's not surprising right now that they missed out on Justin Scott.
No.
It's just a situation that it puts to a close, at least for now, a chapter that just shows that this defensive staff right now is, simply put, not getting the job done. And the missteps that you and I are very well aware of about what happened with Al Washington's recruitment of Justin Scott going to cost you. And when you're going against the likes of Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan and Miami, you can't have those missteps.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's what happened. And now Justin Scott is now committed to Ohio State instead of Notre Dame. And that shouldn't be the case at this point in time.
It's a disaster. I mean, that it really is. I know we're not going to get, fully negative on this show, but it was an absolute disaster that Notre Dame was not able to secure a commitment from Justin Scott and got outdueled by two Midwestern schools for Justin Scott. I mean, we talked about this last week, Brian. For me, it was like if Justin Scott ended up committing to Georgia this month, right, or committed to Miami this month, I would be like, okay, still not good. You still lost a 5-star defensive lineman out of your backyard 90 minutes away, but at least it wasn't to a school that you directly are competing with consistently for recruits, right? You're not going against Georgia in every head-to-head battle in the world. Maybe he's just a kid, even though we know that wasn't going to be true, that wanted to go and be in a different environment and go to the SEC or, go to the ACC and do whatever, right? Like there was that circumstance that could have happened. But the fact is that, it became very apparent over the last couple of weeks that I felt like it was going to be Michigan. Like someone asked me this like this morning. It was like, did you think it was going to be Ohio State? Absolutely not. No, I did not think it was going to be Ohio State. I thought it was going to be Michigan. But
nobody thought it was going to be Ohio State.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody did, but it was always going to be somebody other than Notre Dame, and that
Yes.
was the problem.
Well, that's the point, is that if it wasn't Ohio State, it was probably going to be Michigan. So not only did you get beat by another Midwestern school, you got outplayed by two of them, and two of them that have recently been in college football playoffs over the last couple of years, right? Like substantial players as far as the college football landscape. And there are schools that you need to be able to beat for kids like this. You need to be able to beat them, especially when you have the advantage of 9 minutes away, Chicago, a player that wanted a Notre Dame offer way before he got a Notre Dame offer. Like this one, someone said on the message board that this was handed with a silver platter. I wouldn't quite send it that. I wouldn't say it that aggressively, right? But I would say Notre Dame had the inside track on this recruitment very early. Like they had it, and they weren't able to close. And we talked about this also, Brian, and I still fully believe this. If he would have committed to Georgia or Miami this summer, I would still feel like, okay, Notre Dame still has a chance here. But the fact that he committed to the University to Ohio State's, a team that wasn't even on a serious radar,
Ohio State
University.
No.
Yes.
The Ohio State University.
Yes. A team that we really wasn't even on the radar. Like if you would have asked me where Ohio State was in this recruitment, I would have said third or fourth, like probably at the end of there, as far as when he was going to make when he ended up making the decision. But we're in a situation now where Ohio State got a ton better, obviously, got a big piece of their defensive line class. So great job by Ohio State to obviously finish that one out. But it is just a big black eye on Notre Dame's face right now. The fact that you got beat for Justin Scott, and you would have gotten beaten by two of the Midwestern powers, not just one of them.
Right. Ryan, the thing for me is if it was a situation where one of our members, Karen, and I like Karen, she has great comments in our chat. She's a board member, but the comment is like, I can't fault the staff for this. If a kid just chooses he doesn't come to Notre Dame. And honestly, my thing is, if that were the case, I'd be okay with that. Like somebody asked me yesterday, so does that mean Al Washington lost Keon Keeley, Jason Moore? So I'm like, I don't put Keon Keeley on Al Washington. I don't care who the D-line coach was at Notre Dame last year. That was just not going to happen because Notre Dame didn't have the track record that they needed to have in order to go out and have success with a Keon Keeley once he blew up. That's just the rest. So I'm not putting that on him. But the Jason Moore situation is different, right? The Owen Wafel situation is different. We've said this before. I don't have any fault for Notre Dame for not getting Elijah Rushing. I think they did everything they could have done. We've said this before. I think that's a recruitment that Al Washington handled extremely well. This is not one of those things. And that's the annoying thing about this is there's just these weird, like if you'd recruited this kid like you recruited that kid, we wouldn't be here today. Or if you would have done that and the kid still picked another school, you'd have said, you know what? Tip of the cap to that other school. Notre Dame still has to go out and show that they can win football games. And that's what we'd be talking about. Look, they put their best foot forward and it didn't work out, which is exactly what we said about Elijah Rushing. Have we ever sat here and hammered out Washington for not getting Elijah Rushing? No, because the intel that we've gotten from Elijah and from our sources at Notre Dame are Notre Dame, Al Washington put in work here. Like he did. He put in work here with Elijah Rushing and was part of the reason why. It's the frustration of the inconsistency from recruit to recruit that we get from Al Washington that's so frustrating. So this is not a situation where they did everything they could, and that's what frustrates people so much. I truly believe, Ryan, that if there was no reporting by us, and I don't know what other people are reporting, I don't know if they're confirming what we said or not, don't care. But if we weren't out here reporting that there had been so many dropped balls in this recruitment, I think the reaction today would be very different.
Sure.
It'd be like, look, you lost to Ohio State. You got to go out there and you got to prove that you can beat those teams. Ohio State's a title contender. They lost to Georgia by a point last year. They were a 50-yard missed field goal away from playing for, and they would have won a national title. They'd beat TCU, most likely.
Yeah.
And then you look at it and say, and then Notre Dame's out there getting whooped by Ohio State and getting whooped by, Alabama and teams like that. So, and it'd be fair, tip of the cap, and now Coach Freeman got there and win games. It's the missteps that bother me. Maybe at the end of the day, he still would have picked Ohio State, but we don't know. Because there were the missteps, and we'll have more to say about what those are as we get to signing day. There's some stuff out there that we have agreed with sources to not release, but it was way more than just recruiting him, getting on him late. That was 2 years ago, right? That's past. Year and a half ago. That's past. It was the missteps since then that became the problem, and they made up for this late start. and they had him on the verge of committing in January.
Yep.
And again, there were missteps after that happened.
I think,
That's the reality. You flat out, Ryan, you got outworked.
yes.
And look, I know that Marcus Freeman did a lot of work here. Chad Bowden did a lot of work here to keep Notre Dame in the game. But when the kid is, and we'll get into other coaches in this situation in a minute, but right now we're going to focus on Al Washington because he's the D-line coach. But the fact is you didn't do a good job here with your defensive line coach. Didn't do a good job here. He was not alone, and we'll get into that. But that's the reality. So we don't know, for example, if he still would have picked Ohio State. Now, and I also said, somebody said, well, this is why you should have taken his commitment in January. Strongly disagree. Because what would have happened was this would have been a decommitment and a flip. It would not have been a situation where he'd have been like, well, I'm committed to Notre Dame, so I'm going to stay in the class. No, they did the right thing. That's the one thing they did right, in my opinion, was not taking his commitment and then leading to a situation, because losing a kid in this kind of battle is bad enough.
Yeah.
Losing a kid that flips from your class makes it sting even more. And that's basically what happened to Notre Dame. And it was yet another self-inflicted wound that just continues to happen. Now, I don't think they happen as much under Marcus Freeman so far, but at certain positions, they're still happening too much for this to just be passed off as, well, you just better school got the kid. No, I can't accept that in this situation.
Well, that was the phrase I was going to use, is self-inflicted. I think that's why, I think that's why, and this is from a Notre Dame fandom perspective, I think this is why this one stings so much. Forget about the Chicago thing for a second. Forget about 90 minutes away. Justin Scott had a high love for Notre Dame early in this process. He wanted a scholarship offer to the University of Notre Dame. He was about to commit to the University of Notre Dame several months ago. And the reason that he isn't in the class right now is not simply because he likes Ohio State better, he likes the school better. It's because you hurt yourself in this recruitment with several different parts of this recruitment. And obviously, again, we'll get into more as we get into more, but this was self-inflicted. I think that's where this one really stings the most. It's not that you didn't get Justin Scott. It's not that he preferred Ohio State. It's not any of that stuff. It's that the reason that he preferred these other schools to a large degree is because of what you did, because of what you did to yourself,
Right.
because of how you put yourself behind the 8 ball. Like, this was just not a situation where he was split on 2 schools and he chose this one because he just liked this one a little bit better. No,
Sure.
Notre Dame had a lot of missteps.
And that happens,
Yes,
and that's okay. I mean, that's what we've said. I'm not faulting him for missing on Elijah Rushing. Elijah Rushing is focusing on things that Notre Dame just isn't willing to offer. So I'm not hammering him for that. The Jason Moore one, self-inflicted wound, right? Keon Keeley, it is what it is. You lost a kid that you're not going to get. Right. Dropping Malachi Williams, dropping Owen Wafel from the class. The self-inflicted wounds with Justin Scott, those are all things you chose to do. Yeah. And the whole dropping Owen Wafel thing looks a whole lot worse now when you don't even have Justin Scott in the class. Because, look, if Owen Wafel's still in the class, I'm actually feeling pretty good about it. Look, it's a loss because Owen Wafel's not Justin Scott, but I'm feeling pretty good about the D-line class right now if Owen Wafel's still in the class. I am.
Yeah.
But when you look at him and say he's not good enough to help us go beat Bama, but then you look at Sean Sevillano and say he is, I got to question where you're going with this one. And I think there's been some shaky evaluations, because if you have Owen Wafel in this class, along with Cole Mullins and Logan Thomas and Bryce Davis, and then all of a sudden Sean Sevillano is your number 5 guy, and you can look at it and say, look, he's a big 300-plus pound kid. He adds some you don't have. Cool, I'm with you on that, right? So it's just been those consistent unforced errors that's been a problem. And It's like with receiver recruiting. It's like with linebacker recruiting. We'll get into that here in a second. It's just kind of like, but you're not just losing kids to other schools. Like Peyton Pierce. Yeah. I'm not hammering Notre Dame for missing on Peyton Pierce, because I don't think that the current staff wanted Peyton Pierce. I think the only person that wanted Peyton Pierce, really wanted Peyton Pierce, was James Laurinaitis. And when he left to go to Ohio State, they didn't push for Peyton Pierce as much because the current coaches liked other players better. Okay, fine. All good. Yeah. No problem. No beef with that. But then when we hear, well, they're not going to get this kid because the linebacker coach / defensive coordinator doesn't really talk to him, or decided he wanted to focus on some other kid whose film isn't as better because he's an easier guy to get, those are the things you start having problems with.
Right.
And here's the bigger picture problem, right? I think we've hammered the Justin Scott stuff enough, right? Specifically, his dropped ball. There's a bigger problem afoot here, because Al Washington takes a lot of heat for his recruiting efforts, rightfully so. But here's another sobering reality, Ryan. I'm going to hit him with what I hit you with last night.
Yeah.
Al Washington's their second best recruiter on defense behind Mike Mickens. Think about that for a second. How big of a problem is that? Because you know who else dropped the ball on Justin Scott's recruitment? Al Golden. Your defensive coordinator is supposed to be the head of your defensive recruiting. And then the head coach and the director of recruiting are above him. But Jared Parker takes ownership of the offensive class. Tommy Rees in his last year, post Brian Kelly, when he finally got full control of the offense, took control of that room and said, hey, this is what we're going to go get. Now, you can maybe agree or disagree with certain directions they went with certain recruits and things like that. And that's fine. There's always up for debate, but they took ownership of it. They had their hand in all of it. Al Washington's laissez-faire, I'm just not going to get my hands during this recruitment thing, is another factor in this, because you've got Ryan Day and Jim Knowles and Larry Johnson all pushing for this kid. And at Notre Dame, it's Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden. Your defensive line coach is constantly dropping the ball, and then your defensive coordinator is nowhere to be found. And that's being said way, way too much. When Al Golden, look, I'm not making excuses for Al Washington. It's got to get better. There's no excuse for this. There's no excuse for losing Jason Moore. There's no excuse for your decision to drop Owen Wafer from the class. Those are all inexcusable mistakes. But here's the other part. There still is Logan Thomas in this class. There's still Cole Mullins in this class. There's still Boubacar Traore in last year's class, and Armand Mukum, and you kept Brendan Vernon in the class. And you got Devin Houston, and you've got, Bryce Young and those type of players. There's still some talent in this group that makes you say, okay, that's what this loss hurts so bad. Because if you get Justin Scott, all of a sudden you're looking at a top 5 defensive line class.
Right.
Maybe higher if you're going to talk about ceilings. Well, the rest of it had to already be there in order for that to have that kind of movement. And so when you're looking at a guy like Al Washington, who has had all the missteps he's had, and you're looking at the results saying he's your second best recruiter on the new defensive staff, that's a problem. That's a major problem. Now, I think Chris O'Leary's putting in the work. It's just he's just not closing. Al Golden's not putting in the work. And that's a problem. That's a major problem that Marcus Freeman is going to have to address after the season. Now, I'm not talking about firing people, because, Ryan, you and I have said this. A, we don't call for people to be fired. And B, firing someone's not always the only answer to making changes. There are other ways that you can make changes. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, Ryan, it has to get better. I don't care what happens, that's going to be his call. He's the head coach. He has to make those decisions. I'm not making those decisions, nor am I going to recommend what he should do. That's his job. That's why he gets paid millions of dollars. I don't get paid millions of dollars, and I definitely don't get paid by Notre Dame to make those decisions. He does. And Coach Freeman has to say, this can't continue. Whatever the answer is, it can't continue. And he can't, and here's what Marcus Freeman's also learning. He can't be the primary recruiter for all these kids.
Right.
Because look what he was doing the entire month of May when the coaches were on the road recruiting. He was flying around the country doing things that the head coach of Notre Dame has to do. Speaking at this thing, speaking at that thing, being here, that's part of the reality of being the head coach of Notre Dame. You can be a much stronger recruiter than Brian Kelly was, but you can't do what he did when he was the defensive coordinator. And he needs to learn that. And I think he has, and say, I need to be able to count on you, these other coaches, to get it done. And the reality is in too many instances on defense, they're not. And some of the wins they've had have been more about Notre Dame than they are about the coaches. For example, it didn't take a great coach to get Bronte Johnson here. The number one recruiter for Bronte Johnson was to get to Notre Dame? Bronte Johnson.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like that he wanted to come here. He did the work. It didn't matter who it was. He wanted to be at Notre Dame. It's got to get better, man, because when we're sitting there saying, and no one can really argue with it based on results, that Al Washington is your second best recruiter on defense, that's a problem, Ryan. It's a big problem.
Well, Brian, one of the consistent things that we've heard too is, this was like, I think back to last year's offensive class, right? 2023. And I just think back to talking to a lot of those kids that ended up in the class of Notre Dame, obviously guys that Notre Dame had pushed for. Even if they were offensive linemen, even if they were wide receivers, even if they were tight ends, running backs, excluding the quarterbacks, they all mentioned Tommy Rees, right? Like, you didn't find a recruit that was like, oh, I've never talked to Tommy Rees before.
It was like that when Marcus Freeman was the defensive coordinator as well.
Yeah.
I mean, because you weren't here yet. It was every single kid we talked to was like, "Oh, Coach Freeman." It was a corner, safety, D lineman. Oh, Coach Freeman, Coach Freeman. You'd even have offensive players talking about how they met Coach Freeman during a visit when he was still the defensive coordinator and
Sure.
how that mattered.
Yep.
So yes, the coordinator has to take ownership of it.
Well, and so this is all to say, and Mike Mickens is excluded from this conversation at this moment, but there is a defensive staff issue on recruiting right now, which is very frustrating because there isn't one on the offensive side of the ball at all right now. You look at that, you look at those coaches, Dylan McCullough and Chancey Stuckey and Joe Rudolph and obviously Jared Parker, and like they're putting in work, and everyone's going to have a misstep occasionally. Everyone's going to miss on a kid.
Yes.
But no, none of the misses that offenses is having is because of a lack of efforts. Not a single one of them. Like maybe a bad evaluation occasionally. Maybe just a kid likes the school just better than Notre Dame. That's fine. That's not your fault. Defensive class, for the most part, or defensive side of the recruiting, I should say, there's a lot of self-inflicted issues right now with that side of the football. And if you are able to stop that and get it back, we're talking about, you want to talk about when Notre Dame is going to recruit to the level that everyone's going to be happy about? It's when both sides are going to mirror what the offensive side of the football is doing right now. A lot of grinders on that side, not as much on the defensive side of the football. So there's issues there. Can it be fixed? Yeah, it can be fixed. And that doesn't just mean firing people and replacing people necessarily, but there are things that could be fixed for sure. But they have to do it quick because now this is 2024 defensive recruiting, it's trending in a terrible direction, a really bad direction. There's still a lot of good to the class, but there's not enough of it, right? And then you're going to get into the 2025 very soon because you're still at 20 commits in the class. You're going to get into the 2025 full barge, and you're going to look at it and be like, man, you're in a good spot right now. And I've had a lot of updates on the board, right, Brian? But you're top 2 or 3 for like several big time recruits on the defensive side of the football in 2025. But if you don't fix this issue right now, that's going to change. You're going to lose traction with kids. You're going to lose steam. Like that stuff's going to happen. This is not a process that can be sustainable. You can't do this year in and year out and expect to continue to get great talent. You're hurting yourself right now. You're hurting yourself.
Now there are players out there that they can go get that will stem some of this negative tide, right? And one of those guys is out there, and that's Kingston Viliama-Asa, Ryan. So basically the latest with him is essentially he's in decision-making mode, and it's Notre Dame, USC, and Ohio State.
Yep.
I believe, Ryan, you can back me up that right now I believe USC is the biggest threat to Notre Dame at this particular time, but we also thought that Michigan was the biggest threat to Justin Scott a week ago. And that's when you're recruiting against teams like Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State. They're always a threat for kids. But you get Kingston, and it helps stop the bleeding, essentially. Because I think a lot of Notre Dame fans, they're rational and not like just completely having their entire week ruined because a kid made a decision not for their school. And again, I'm not against the passion, right? I love the passion. That's why there's over 500 people in this chat right now, because they're passionate about Notre Dame football. We're doing this show right now because we're passionate about Notre Dame football.
Absolutely.
But I think the realistic people are there's a lot of people in this chat that have been saying for weeks, Justin Scott's not coming to Notre Dame.
Yep.
He's not coming to Notre Dame.
Including me. Yeah,
right.
And you. Right. So, yeah.
So I think most people can kind of deal with that. There's some people that just, no matter what happens, they're just looking for a reason to act emotionally to things, and sky is falling and just complain. That's always going to be the case.
And they only come to the chat when something is
wrong. Right. Or they're more vocal when that's going on. Right. And
exactly.
So that's going to happen. But here's the thing. You go out and lose Kingston, and now that's a problem because a month ago you were the perceived leader, right, for him. And so that's where you've got to say, look, you can recover from this by getting a Kingston Viliama-Asa. Maybe going and adding Bradley Shaw to the class. Finishing this class off on the right way is certainly something that this defensive staff needs to sort of say, hey, guys, look, this isn't going good. We lost this kid. We've lost this kid. We're not going to get that kid. We got to really make sure we buckle down and do what we got to do to get this kid. And I don't want to hear the whole I'm on vacation thing right now, right? Because you got to go get it done. So we'll find out if they will. It's going to be interesting. But right now, I don't feel super great about Kingston. I feel better than I did last week. Don't feel nearly as good as I did 2 weeks ago. They gotta finish. I don't know that he's definitely decided what he's going to do right now, Ryan.
I don't think so either.
I was going to ask you this: do you
Yeah.
think I said this in a show last week, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it?
Yeah.
I feel like the longer this goes on, the better it actually is for Notre Dame, because some of the emotion of the Ohio State visit, and then more so the push from USC and the local push, kind of wears down a little bit, and then he's going to make whatever decision it is, because then I think it gets back to maybe more of the Notre Dame Ohio State thing, than it was before, where before USC started making that hey, you're stay home kind of push. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Well, I think for me, and I talked about this a little bit after I spoke with Kingston following the 3 official visits. We had a piece obviously on Irish Breakdown on that if anybody missed it. But I mean, Brian, there are a lot of recruits that you can. Let me phrase this correctly. There are a lot of recruits that love the recruiting process. There's a lot of recruits that also don't tell the truth all the time about some things that are happening in their recruit. Obviously, they kind of keep their things close to the vest. And Kingston's a young man. I've been very consistent on this one. He doesn't strike me in my conversations I've had with him to be a person that's going to make a very quick decision, right? Like this has been very calculated for a long time. So when he told me, not this past Sunday, the Sunday before following the Ohio State visit, that he was going to take 2 weeks and make a decision, the next 2 weeks were going to be big for striking down a decision, I think that he's actually going to take those 2 weeks. Like, I don't think you're just going to wake up one morning and it's going to be like, oh, Kingston committed somewhere and it was unprompted and you weren't really expecting it. I think he's doing his due diligence. I think he's taking all the data into consideration. He's talking to his family and he's praying. I think that he's doing all of those things because he's been very consistent. Very consistent.
It doesn't mean he's going to pick Notre Dame, right? We're not saying that. Some people understand that.
Yeah.
But I think it's good because then the decision won't be an emotional one, to your point.
Exactly.
It'll be more of a thoughtful one. Whereas if he would have committed right after the visits, I think it would have been to USC. And it would have been an emotional one. So, they got to close. But I don't feel great about that right now, Ryan. Honestly, if I had to put my mortgage on it right now, I'm not putting my mortgage on Kingston picking Notre Dame. So we'll see. We'll see. And so, it's going to get interesting. I'd be pushing for Bradley Shaw right now. As well. I mean, I don't know if they are or aren't, but I would, just because, and look, Ohio State fans, all right, have some sense here, okay? Number one, stop coming here with what Ohio State people report. Notre Dame is not out for Kingston Viliama Asa, okay? So just please stop, all right? Just chill, okay? I don't want to have to ban you guys because we've had some really good Ohio State people coming in here, but just show some class, okay? So at the end of the day, Ryan, we'll find out if he's going to pick Notre Dame or not. Right now, not feeling great about it. We'll see how that plays out. Also had a loss on offense this week too, right? Yes. And that is obviously you lost Isaiah Canyon. And here's basically where we're at with all this, Ryan. End of the day, here's something somebody said the other day. Somebody said, well, you can't be surprised that Notre Dame lost a kid because they're not recruiting well on defense because of Marshall and Stanford. And my response is, well, then why is the offensive recruiting going so well? Right? Even with the loss of Isaiah Canyon, the offensive class is outstanding. We feel really good about where things are trending with Gearby Lambert. And so that's a big thing, right? And so if you can get him, the offensive side of the ball was the reason they lost to Marshall and Stanford last year. Right. So you can keep looking for excuses as to why this is happening. The fact of the matter is they did not get it done. Okay? They did not get it done. Here's something you can do to help yourself. Right? Right now, Al Washington, there's no player out there that they can go get a commitment from tomorrow on the defensive line that's going to make Notre Dame fans feel better about this. That guy, now there's players out there. They're just not going to get those guys. There's one thing that Al Washington can do right now to fix this, and that's focus on you're reporting for camp in like 22, 21 days. Go put a great product on the field, right? Al Golden, you don't want to be at Notre Dame. You want to move on to somewhere else. That's fine. Then go out there and put a great product on the field, right? That's basically what you need to do. And so that right now needs to be the focus because this is a team that went 9-4 last year. This is a team that lost to Marshall and Stanford. Do I think that's the primary reason they lost these kids? No, I don't. Do I think it's enough of a factor to when you're looking at a kid like Justin Scott and Ohio State's talking to him about winning championships and all that kind of stuff, and it matters. Okay, because they were a point away from beating Georgia last year, right? And so they beat Notre Dame by 11 last year. So to me, end of the day, that's basically what they're going to need to do, Ryan, is go out there and put a great product on the field, because I actually am very optimistic about this defense this year. I am.
I'm optimistic about the team in general. I mean, I really am, and I know you are too. So, I mean, it helps, Brian, right? Like that makes it an easier conversation, an easier sell to say, like, hey, you want to become a part of something really cool? Like, watch what we're doing every dang Saturday, man, and we have a chance to beat some really good football teams. If you go and you beat Ohio State and Clemson and USC, or you go 2-1 against those top three, it's like, all right, it's notable, man. Like, all right, good job, Notre Dame. You know, that you're obviously coaching well, even if you're not recruiting to the level that we would like to, obviously, but it would definitely make things easier. There's no doubt, because Brian, we've talked about this, right? You still need to close the 2024 class, because it still has a chance to be a good class for Notre Dame, like a really good class for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that we're also looking forward to 2025. I think that 2025 has a chance to be a special class, but it's not going to be a special class if you don't back it up on the field, because that's where all these kids are going to, like Deuce Knight, for instance. Let's use Deuce, because I know he's visiting, obviously, at the end of July.
Go put that news out there real quick, Ryan, so we had it on the story and the board. Just go ahead and be specific about that.
Yep, July 27th, Brian was able to confirm that last night with Deuce, who is obviously the great quarterback out of Lucedale, Mississippi, the top quarterback on the board right now for the University of Notre Dame in the 2025 class, who we have been telling you all for well over a month now that it was Notre Dame and Tennessee, and then probably Ole Miss in a distant third as far as the teams that are really standing out. So Deuce is going to be on the move in July to a couple different places, including Ole Miss on July 29th. But he's going to be visiting Notre Dame on the 27th. He's been a kid that's been adamant that this summer he would like to make a decision despite only being a 2025 recruit. But my point is, Brian, is whether you get a commitment from Deuce Knight in this summer or you don't, and he extends it into the fall, if you go out and you struggle throwing the football this year or struggle offensively, that's going to hurt a kid like that, man. It's like, why would I want to go from Lucedale, Mississippi up to South Bend, Indiana to struggle offensively? Like, I don't want to do that, right? Because there's a lot of good teams that you can go. Like, if you care much about offensive firepower, like, you could just stay at Ole Miss. You can go to Tennessee. Like, there's a lot of teams that are doing good stuff offensively down where he lives. So that is big, obviously, to convince those guys. Usman Croma out of the state, out of the state of Virginia. Like, you want to get him to come up and play football for University of Notre Dame? Show that you are a potent offense. These wide receivers that we keep talking about, right? The Talon Taylors of the world. Now, obviously, Talon is a kid that's right in your backyard, right? But you still need to be able to show that you can take advantage of what Taylor brings to the table. So these offensive recruits in 2025, to go along with already having Nate Roberts in the class, you need to show growth, because you can look at the first season in 2022 and say, first season under Marcus Freeman, he had to figure some stuff out. Now, 2023, things start to change a little bit. But if there's struggles in 2023 as well, if I'm a recruit, I'm saying, I don't know if that's going to get a lot better. Like, I don't know if that's a great process right now. I'm not sure about that.
Well, and that kind of leads to just really both sides of the ball, Ryan, and that is put a great product on the field defensively, and it changes things to a degree. It does. All of a sudden, like Larry Johnson is not the recruiter he used to be. He's basically just going the Harry Heastand route now. I mean, and it still works. Why? Because he's just pointing to his resume. I mean, look what I did at Penn State. Look what I'm doing at Ohio State. Like, he's not the recruiter he used to be. He's not the coach he used to be. I would argue, if you look at, look, some people are stupid. This is why I told you not to have the chat on today, Ryan.
I don't have it on.
But when you look at situations like this, right, and you look at the defense and you say, hey, listen, right now, Larry Johnson is winning recruits over Notre Dame, and Ryan Day's beating Notre Dame for recruits and other because they're looking and saying, look what we've done.
Right.
Look what we've done.
Yeah.
I would argue that right now, you look at Ohio State's defensive line, I think they underachieved last year when you look at how many five-star players are on it. I pointed this out the other day. Notre Dame's numbers last year from their defensive line compared to Ohio State's. Ohio State had like 2 more tackles for loss. Notre Dame had 5 more sacks from their defensive line. Right. Notre Dame's defensive line had greater production last year than Ohio State's. But it's the track record. Kids don't want to hear that. That's not going to register with a kid. If I give you tackle for loss and sack numbers from the 25 22 Notre Dame defense and the 22 Ohio State defensive line and all this kind of, it's not going to register.
Right.
You know, what will register?
Chase Young and the
Yes,
Bosa's and
right, exactly.
Yeah.
The track record, and it goes even back to his time at Penn State.
Sure.
The track record is there.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing. So go out there and put the product on the field. That's what you do. Put a product on the field this year. Al Washington's got a great chance with Jordan Patejo and Riley Mills. And because imagine what it would say to recruits if Al Washington could turn Javonte Jean-Baptiste into a 9 to 10 tackle for loss, 5-6 sack guy this year. Right? Like Ohio State couldn't get this out of that kid. I did. Imagine if Riley Mills goes out there and does what I think you and I are on the same page here. Maybe to different degrees, but there's no reason Riley Moss can't be a double-digit tackle for loss guy if you can get him to play to his potential. There's no reason Jordan Patejo can't be an 8+ sack guy if he plays to his potential. And all of a sudden the product on the field is really good. And now you've got something to look at and say, hey, look what I did with Isaiah Foskey last year, right? Look what I'm doing now with this group, right? Like, look, we're putting a product on the field. At the end of the day, that's gonna matter.
Yep.
And so that's what you need to do. And because we can complain all we want about like the work ethic is not where it needs to be. The work volume from Al Washington or Al Golden, the consistency and efficiency and just the discipline as a recruiter from Al Washington. I still don't understand what Chris O'Leary's problem is because I've never heard anyone complain about the work ethic. Kids seem to really like him. You talk to recruits that seem to really like the guy and then they just pick someone else. I don't get it.
I've heard Chris O'Leary's name associated as that's my guy in the 2025 class as much as anybody of Notre Dame coaches on the staff. It's weird.
But I don't know if any of those kids are going to pick Notre Dame.
Right.
And that's the weird thing.
Yeah.
So you just get down to it, Ryan, and the product on the field has to be better.
Yep.
And it's not an excuse for the class because the offense had a way worse product on the field the last 2 years than the defense did. And they're recruiting at a very high level the last year plus. But even then, that matters. That matters. It matters that you go out there and you put a product on the field. If all of a sudden you're selling kids on this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do, and then you go out there and you don't do it, it's going to hurt you.
Right.
And so that's the thing that you should be sort of your saving grace a little bit, Ryan, is look, you've got a chance this year to go out there and put a product on the field that's going to get you fired up. And I am excited about this team. So it's like I'm at the point now where I'm just like I'm so over recruiting and I'm so over these kids and their decisions and the reactions that people have on Twitter and other places to these decisions. It's just like, good Lord, I'm 45 years old. Like there's so many more important things going on in my life than this. But it's a part of the deal though. Recruiting is the lifeblood of a program. You always come back to that. Well, I am excited about this season, and that's something that they can do to kind of get them. The best way they can get the momentum back, get Kingston, get Gilby Lambert, go out there and win.
Yeah, agree there.
That's what it boils down to. And if the recruiting has soured you on the season, seek help because the recruiting that's going on right now has nothing to do with the 23 season. Nothing. 24, maybe. 25, maybe. 22, 23 season, nothing. None of these kids. Justin Scott's not suiting up against Ohio State this year, folks. Right? Yeah. And that's the reality of it. So we'll see if they can get it done or not.
Is Twitter's done you a little bit of a favor, Brian, is that Elon Musk keeps nickel and diming people so you can only see 600 tweets a day now.
Well, I think they backed off that now. So which it was so funny when I got that notice and I was like, okay, I can't tweet anymore. And I just said, okay, put Twitter down. And it was such a relaxing day. It really was on Saturday. It was a very, very relaxing day on Saturday. So yeah, but look, they got to get this done, right? I mean, at the end of the day, put a better product in field, be more on top of what you're getting out of your staff. And if you're not getting what you want, figure out what you need to do to get it done.
Yeah.
Because these kind of things, Ryan, these self-inflicted wounds just can't keep happening. That's at the end of the day, that's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. I want to talk about receiver, Ryan. I wrote an article today and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. And my response was there's a lot of people that as soon as Isaiah Canyon decommitted, which was a loss, right? I already talked about that on Saturday, so we need to revisit that per se. But at the end of the day, here's my thoughts. There's a lot of reactions from people. Look at this guy, look at that guy, focus on maybe circle back on Jason Robinson. What about Quasi Gilmore? What about Jeremiah McClellan? Guys like that. Reality is Notre Dame pretty much moved on from all those guys, and for a reason. Never had interest in Nitro Tuggle, so just let that one go. My whole thing is, instead of circling back, what I would do if I'm Notre Dame is be patient.
Yeah.
And there's 3 reasons for it. Number one, the only guy that's definitely off the roster after 23 is Matt Salerno. Chris Tyree, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas all have multiple seasons of eligibility remaining as of right now. You also signed, so that's number one. So you have a lot of talent coming back on your 2024 roster expected. Point being, if any receiver is going to come in and play as a freshman, he's going to have to be really good.
Yeah.
So there's no need to go get a body right now because it's not going to impact you in 24 anyway. Then you look at last year's class and you look at the 23 freshman class, and 3 of them have already shown up and look like hits. They look like they're going to fit. They're doing well. And obviously, Jaden Greathouse had a great spring. Rico Flores had a great spring. Braylon James is a little bit more up and down, which we kind of expected because of how raw he is. But when he was on, you're like, yep, he's who we thought he was. Yep. And then Caleb Smith shows up. You've already got Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert in the 24 class. So you have 6 kids in a 2-year stretch. They're okay right now. Now, I think a third guy is needed because when you look at it, there's no guarantee that Deion Colsey is going to come back in 25 and Jaden, actually Deion Colsey can't come back in 25. There's no guarantee that Jaden Thomas is going to be back in 25. And if Tobias Merriweather is as good as we think he can be, there's no guarantee that he comes back in 2025. So you don't want to be going into 2025 asking that freshman class to fill your depth chart like you're asking the 23 class to do, right? And so that's why 24 is good. However, with the numbers where they are, I don't think you need to rush there. And then the third reason is because I do think you're going to put a great product on the field this year, or at least you think that you are. I tend to agree with them. So go out there and say, hey, look, we can be patient. And if Notre Dame goes out there and they in September put up a bunch of points and throw the ball all around the field and, go out and Beetle House it. And all of a sudden, maybe a Ryan Wingo type of player starts saying, you know what? I didn't look at you guys before because I watched your offense last year and wanted no part of that. But I liked Notre Dame and this, and now all of a sudden I'm going to give you a second look. So to me, at the end of the day, that's really the 3 reasons why I would say if I'm Notre Dame, I'm being patient. I'm not circling back on some kid that you liked but you didn't love just because you need a third. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Well, and I think the evaluation period is going to be a big time too, right? Like you mentioned Ryan Wingo, obviously, who's already a known commodity. Everybody knows Ryan Wingo. Notre Dame has recruited Ryan Wingo for some time. Ryan Wingo has been to Notre Dame multiple times in the past. But I think that the evaluation process is big. I mean, I think people mentioned even on the board, like this time last year, we didn't know who Caleb Smith was. Like we had no idea who that kid was, but then you find that kid. And I think that those risers always happen. And I think for me, Brian, too, it's like circling back. It's also, you can start that process if you want, but it's also look at the state of their recruitments for some of the kids that you would be circling back on. Like Quasi Gilmore is about to make a commitment soon. Josiah Brown just made a commitment, obviously, to Penn State. Jason Robinson just committed to the University of Washington.
And you dropped them.
Exactly.
There's going to be some feelings there.
And I can tell you 100%, there is definitely some feelings there from a couple of them. There's no doubt about that, which I completely understand. I get that, right? You got passed up for another player, which 100% understand why the feelings are there. But at the end of the day, I think that this is much more of a let's not circle back to circle back because we're desperate, right? This is July. There's no time for desperation yet. Like you don't have to be desperate right now. Right now is a time where you have several months before National Signing Day. You have an evaluation period that's going to begin in September and October to really understand who are the risers, who are guys that we didn't even know about, who are guys that just grew into their body this offseason, who's the guys that now every team is starting to take big looks at, like the Brandon Hillmans, of the world, like the Caleb Smiths of the world, like the Armel Mookums of the world. You can still find those kind of kids, right? So I think that you should be patient here because any move right now in the next couple weeks, like that's just desperation, man. Like just if you're going to trust yourselves as much as you have, as far as from a coaching and recruiting perspective, as far as getting the most out of kids, why start this now, right? The desperation thing. Don't be desperate. Just let this thing play out a little bit. There's going to be some players that we start talking about, I'm sure, Brian, in the September and October where you don't even know who they are right now. Like, you have no idea this kid's name. Maybe there's just some like nondescript kid out of the state of Texas, and with Chancey Stuckey's ties, we know that he can obviously go into Texas and really attract those types of players. And so I think that there's a lot of time to figure that stuff out. So no, I would not rush this either, because I'm not for desperation in July. I don't think that makes any sense.
Right. Push for the big time needle movers and be patient and allow the Brandon Hillmans, the Tayshawn Lyonses, the kids like that kind of pop up, Dylan Edwardses that pop up, those type of talents. Wait for those guys to pop up. And if you have a better product to sell this year, then you can go sell it. And that's
Tayshawn Lyons is another good example. That's a very good example. Yep.
Caleb Smith. Yep. Right now. So I know you and I have a little bit of a difference of opinion on him, but we both think he's a good football player.
I would still take him into another version of Caleb Smith. Yes. I would still take him in the 2024 class. Like, there's no doubt about that. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So there's no need to rush into that, Ryan. And I don't think they're going to. We'll kind of have to see how that all plays out. I don't think they're going to rush into that.
Right.
I think where it comes down to here, Ryan, is it is what it is in the 24 class right now. You are close to being done. You've got to make sure that you finish this strong and finish it smart. Because at the end of the day, if they close out correctly, we're going to look at the 24 class a lot like we looked at the 23 class. Man, this is an outstanding class. If only you would have landed Keon Keeley, it'd have been perfect. If you finish this class off the right way, we're having that conversation about the defense. I would say I'd still probably complain about the safety class a little bit, just, the bottom of the safety class and some of the misses there. But I'm looking at the rest saying, hey, look, man, if you'd have just got Justin Scott, perfect. You didn't get it done. Okay, now do better next year, but it's still a really good class. If you miss out on Justin Scott, you miss out on Kingston, you miss out on Bradley Shaw, all of a sudden there's a problem developing here that that's creating some problems.
Yep.
And, because you have to address it, because in some of here's the thing, Ryan, this is going to sound weird. I'm not excusing anything that Al Golden has done. I'm not excusing any of the misses that Al Washington has had. I'm not excusing the lack of results from Chris O'Leary right now. But I am going to say it. If you're going to have a bad year, the 24 class is the one to do it, because this is not a strong defensive class nationally. It's not a great class, period. Notre Dame has really cleaned up in some areas where it is good. Quarterback at the top. They got one of the best. They've got an outstanding running back 1-2 punch right now. I would argue is as good as any 1-2 punch they've had. That includes Josh Adams and Dexter Williams. It includes Greg Bryant and Torian Folston. It includes going back to Theo Riddick and Sear Wood, Robert Hughes and Armando Allen, as far as where they were as recruits. It is outstanding. The receiver class took a hit with Isaiah Canyon, no doubt about it, but you still have two outstanding wide receivers. And if you're able to get Gilby Lambert, you're rolling on offense, right? And in a year where, you're kind of fortunate if you get Gilby Lambert. You ended up putting together a really good offensive line class in a year where it's not a great offensive line year.
Right.
That's just the reality of it. And then defensively, you could say, well, you got some high upside kids like Cole Mullins and Logan Thomas. It's not a great D-line year. The guys that were really good, you're not going to go down and get Edric Houston. You're not going to get Dylan Stewart. Those are just not guys Notre Dame's ever going to be a player for. Just get used to it, right? Linebacker, it's not a great year at linebacker. It's not a great year at safety. And you say, well, yeah, you had some misses, et cetera, whatever. There's excuses you can make for it. You fast forward to 25, Ryan, it's loaded at linebacker. It looks pretty darn good at safety already. It looks pretty good at corner already. I still have film to watch of the defensive tackles, but the defensive end class looks pretty good already. It's a much better 25 class. So if you don't recognize and address the issues now, it's going to bite you in the butt next year. If you don't put a great product on the field in 23, it's going to bite you in the butt next year. So there's work that can be done, in my opinion. And they've got to go. That's why it's so important to Coach Freeman make the changes to make sure that this doesn't happen again in 25. And the first thing you do is make sure the product on the field this year is outstanding. That's gonna mean a lot. It's gonna mean a ton. And then if you can, get your coaches to recruit better, recruit smarter, do whatever you need them to do. Like, here's the conversation Al Golden I'd have after the season. Do you want to be here? Yeah, I want to be here. I like it here. Okay, then I need you to do this. I know you can recruit. I've seen you when you care. I've seen you do it. You're good at it. You either need to do it or go find somewhere else to go. That's the conversation that needs to be had. And Coach Washington, hey, you did a great job, because here's the double-edged sword. If you go put a great product on the field, are you seriously going to fire 3 coaches that just were responsible for putting a great product on the field? No, you're not. But you do say, if you want to be here, you can't do this again. Now go get it done. And that's basically where it's going to be, Ryan. And that's the task that Coach Freeman has. Because at the end of the day, he's the head coach. When Brian Kelly had assistant coaches that weren't getting the job done, guess who he held accountable? Brian Kelly, because he's the head coach. Yeah. Coach Freeman is responsible. You hired these guys. You're either doing something about it, or you're allowing it, or you're promoting it. That's basically that's the only really 2 options, big picture. Because if it keeps happening and you don't do anything about it, then you're basically allowing it. And so that's what Coach has to do. He has to figure it out. But it's got to start with the on the field product, Ryan, on both sides of the ball, but especially defensively, because if you can put a good product on the field, as you know, I don't know why, but 25 kids are really digging Notre Dame right now.
They are.
It's kind of crazy. Like as bad as Al Golden has done in the 24 class, you're hearing his name a lot more with 25 linebackers. You are. You just interviewed Christian Jones, a top 100 linebacker from Nebraska, and he talked about Al Golden multiple times in that conversation. Brian Smith just interviewed Bryce Davis, the top 50 defensive lineman, top 50 player who's a defensive lineman from North Carolina. Him and his mom raved about Al Washington.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good early start, but you got to continue this. You've got to continue it. Now, my hope, Ryan, is that is the byproduct of Coach Freeman already having the come to Jesus conversation with those coaches. Hey, look, 24, what's done is done. We can't go back and fix what happened with Justin Scott. I'll try to fix that. I need you to go do this, right? We can't fix where we are. We can't wave a magic wand and say you did a better job recruiting Kingston or Bradley Shaw, whoever else that may be out there, Malachi, whatever. But you can fix it for 25. My hope is that the work that you're seeing on a daily basis when you're interviewing, because if y'all haven't been on irishbreakdown.com, Ryan has put out a ton of 25 recruiting updates the last 2 weeks, right? And you're hearing names that we don't often hear. You said it about Chris O'Leary. That's my dude.
Yeah.
We're hearing Al Golden's name mentioned a lot more. Josiah Kia talked a lot about Al Golden. He hits him up all the time. Christian Jones talked about how consistently he talks to Al Golden. Bryce Davis and his mom praising Al Washington. The hope, Ryan, is that this is a trend that comes from Coach Freeman sitting down and having that come to Jesus conversation. That's my hope. Because if you can fix the problem, there's a lot of talented 25 kids that for whatever reason are super high on Notre Dame. And if you can put a good product on the field and then put in the work, all of a sudden you can overcome some of these misses that are bad misses in the 24 class, in my opinion. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Well, I mean, I talked about that a little bit, right? So, like, that was my example, obviously, with Deuce Knight. It's that you need to be able to cut every basis, right? Like, you need to be able to, because the great thing about Notre Dame is that Notre Dame is always going to be a sell for parents, for the most part. It's always going to be a sell for the kids that are academically oriented. It's always going to be a sell for the kids that are spiritual, for the most part, right? Like, those things are always going to kind of check those boxes. But the box that needs to be checked also is that, let's be honest, most of these kids, their goal is to play in the NFL, and it should be. Like, that should be their goal, right? They should have that goal in mind. And they don't want to go to a place where they were not going to have a chance to be developed to the highest level and to win football games. That stuff matters. It matters extensively. It's not... There's some great recruiters at the University of Georgia right now. There's some great recruiters at the University of Alabama. There's some great recruiters at Clemson. Like, there's some great recruiters there because they've had a lot of, they have a lot of great coaches, which is why they've been successful at points, obviously, over the last few years. And most recently, obviously, with Georgia the last 2 years. But it's a lot easier to be a great recruiter at Georgia when you got 2 national championship rings on your finger, right? Like that's a whole lot easier, man. Kirby Smart's a great recruiter regardless, but it's also becoming an easier job. Everyone's like, man, the 2024 class for Georgia is a fantastic. It's like, yeah, because every time Kirby Smart goes into a room right now, he's got 2 championship the rings on his finger. Like it's an easy sell on top of being a good recruiter. It makes things easier. Winning makes things easier. And that's what Notre Dame needs to get to, obviously. Get a great product on the field, win football games. Recruiting becomes easier in that situation.
I think it's important in 25 too, Ryan, because you have to be smart to recognize what's in front of you. You have to recognize what part of the reason the Notre Dame focused so much on Bodie Cahoon and Teddy Rizak is because a lot of the top linebackers in the 24 class are low ceiling, high floor guys. I don't think Notre Dame had a lot of interest in that. After getting the 2 linebacker classes they got, I don't really think they needed a high floor, low ceiling guy. They're loaded at linebacker with young talent. They wanted guys with higher ceilings, and the guys they shot for, the Sammy Browns, those kind of guys, Aaron Childs, they didn't get. And so they were going to take chances on, they would rather take a chance on a Bodie Cahoon than a Chris Jones, for example. Now, Chris Jones is a very good football player, but Chris Jones is a higher floor guy. He's not a higher ceiling guy. That's why they took a swing at Darius Hayes. Darius Hayes is a little on the raw side, but he's got tons of upside. You just missed him, you know? And that's, speaking of, I just mentioned 2 guys that are committed to Florida. If they can keep that linebacker class together, good night. That's a heck of a linebacker
and
class.
Miles Graham might be the best of the 3, which is wild.
He has the highest floor for sure. I think the other 2 guys have even higher ceilings, but Miles Graham, I mean, he's got that DNA that we always talk about, right? He's a good freaking football player. So my only thing with Graham is just the size, Ryan. I kind of feel about him like I do about Bradley Shaw. He's a better player than Bradley Shaw, but it's like, okay, it's just a little I wish he was a little bit bigger, but man, he's really freaking good. But the point is they took their shot with the high ceiling kids in this class, and they got some and they missed out on others. I can live with that. If you followed up next year, because next year's linebacker class it's one of the best. Now, again, we'll see how these guys develop. But it's one of the best linebacker classes I've seen in a long time, Ryan. Just the kids on Notre Dame's board. I mean, not even getting into the guys they haven't even offered yet. I'm just talking about the kids that we've evaluated that Notre Dame has offered. It is an absolutely loaded linebacker class. I mean, we could sit here all day and start pumping out names. I mean, you've had articles recently on Noah McHale. Gavin Nix talked to Brian Smith the other day. He's very high on Notre Dame. Justin Hill, Madden Ferriamo. I think you interviewed him recently as well. Elijah Barnes from Texas, who's now a top 100 kid. Anthony Saka, Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, Landon McComber. I mean, it is an absolutely Christian Jones. I'm just trying to make sure I don't forget anybody as I go through this list. Brett Clatterball is a top 200 kid that's visited Notre Dame. It is an absolutely loaded linebacker class. So guess what? You better make sure your freaking linebacker recruiting operation is a whole lot better next year than it is this year, right? Look at the safety class in next year, Ryan. It's a smaller class, but there's Kendall Daniels, Trey Harrison, Ethan Long, Trey McNutt, Remington Moss, Matai Tagoa, who I think might end up being more of a rover, Jordan Young. There's some dudes on that board now, right? Where if you get 3 of those guys, you've got 2 or 3 of those guys, you got yourself a heck of a safety class. And the same thing at corner. At the end of the day, you know how many of those guys are committed? 0. So you've got to get the job done. So product on the field and making sure the work you're putting in is better. Do that, and then all of a sudden, we look at 24 as a blip on the radar. That's what we do. Even if they do miss on Kingston and don't flip Caleb Beasley and all that type, right? Even if they completely strike out on defense, fix it for 25, and all of a sudden we look back and say, hey, blip on the radar. Because every team has years like this. Ohio State had a year like this a couple years ago. Where it's just like, man, that just wasn't a tip. I know it was ranked high, but you just watch the film and you're like, this isn't a typical Ohio State class. Then the next year they bounce back with a great class and they're back on track, and it's a blip on the radar. Yeah. And that's where Notre Dame needs to be right now. And that's why it's up to Coach Freeman to say, we're going to fix this. That at the end of the day, that's the person that's responsible for fixing it. One way or the other, he's the one that's going to have to fix it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great note, is that we don't decide how it gets fixed. We just know that it needs to be fixed. Right. Like, that's the process stuff, right? And one thing that we know about Marcus Freeman, right? The jury's still out from a coaching perspective. We're still figuring out what type of head coach he is. But he comes with a great reputation as a recruiter, and we know that he is a absolute dog on the trail, an absolute dog.
He's got to be frustrated by this, Ryan.
I would think so. Yeah.
Because if he's still just a D coordinator, I don't think they miss on Justin Scott. I don't think they miss on Kingston Viliama-Asa. I have no proof that that's the case. Other than just look what happened in the first 2 classes that he was a primary recruiter for, and you'll get your answer. You know what I mean? Like, so because here's something that I think Marcus Freeman's realizing. A head coach is very important in the recruiting trail. Sure. When you get down to the nitty gritty of big time players, the coordinators and position coaches are going to have a bigger impact. The head coach needs to be the closer.
Yeah.
You can't be the driver for a bunch of kids on defense, because at the end of the day, they're playing for you big picture, but they're not playing for you. You know what I mean? They're not playing for you like they are when you look at, when you were the D coordinator. They were literally playing for you. You're going to be coaching them every single day. It's different now, and he's got to learn that. And that's part of the evolution of being a new coach is you learn these lessons. Hey, take the lessons because like what he's doing now, the 24 class, Ryan, is he's learning the lessons on the recruiting trail that he learned on the field last year as the on-field head coach. Right? The 24 class was really, to me, sort of the first full class of Marcus Freeman as the head coach, even more than 23. Because when you look at 23, a lot of the kids in the 23 class were committed early to Notre Dame. I mean, now they got a lot of guys after he was hired. I mean, the receiver class got put together after he was hired, right? But I'm talking like Keon Keeley, Brennan Vernon, Drake Bowen, a lot of those guys and even the guys that committed later were guys that Marcus Freeman got on when he was still the D coordinator. So it was just as a different animal. Christian Gray was offered by Notre Dame and worked out when he was still the D coordinator. Peyton Bowen committed on January 1st. Marcus Freeman had been head coach for less than a month. He'd been on Peyton Bowen for a while. He visited that summer. So all those recruitments started when he was still the defensive coordinator. This is the first cycle where all of it was basically with him as the head coach. So these mistakes, these losses, these misses are things that you're going to say, if he can apply them and make the changes that we saw him make from a coaching standpoint, because here's the thing, he chose not to fire certain coaches after this offseason. But you know what he did? Sat down with them and said, we're going to do this differently, and we're going to do this better. And, look, say what you want about Al Washington's recruiter. I thought he did some really good things in the spring as a coach. If you go out there and coach your butt off this spring, that helps you as a recruiter, right? So I think he's applied a lot of lessons learned from year one as a coach onto the coaching aspect of where this football team is trending. Now he's got to do that same thing on the recruiting trail and realize, okay, here's the impact I can and can't have. How was he supposed to know that he'd have a less of an impact as a head coach than he did as a coordinator until you go through it and you realize, boy, we really need the D coordinator and the D line coach to really step up. We need the D coordinator and the linebacker coach to really step up. Boy, we need better from this position. Do that. If he applies those lessons, and they're going to be fine. Because I do like the lessons. I mean, the process to me, the process to get there was not great in some of these areas as far as putting the staff together, the Ludwig fiasco and all that kind of stuff. But I look at the coaching staff now and I'm like, dude, they got a better coaching staff now than they did last year, top to bottom, in a lot of different ways. And partly because, again, some of the guys that are returning, Chancey Stuckey is better now than he was a year ago, you think. Dylan McCullough, because guys that have the year of experience. And you got to just go out and get it done. We'll see if he can do it. Before we move on to the mailbag, Ryan, we do have an interview. Speaking of 25 recruiting, Notre Dame has got some very heavy interest from a young man named Justin Thurman. I had a chance to watch him, Ryan, this summer at the Irish Invasion. Or actually, it wasn't the Irish Invasion. It was one of the summer workout camps. And this is a kid, Ryan, with a lot of ability. And is a kid that was basically a backup running back last year. They had a senior that played D1, is playing D1 football somewhere. He played a little bit. I think his numbers were a little better than what they're listed, but he didn't play a ton. He's going to be the feature back this year at Tampa Jesuit. And he is a kid that I ran a 10.9 as a sophomore. No, yep. I'm sorry. He ran this in 2022. So it was going into his sophomore year. So I think it was the end of his, because what's he now, Ryan? He's a sophomore right now, right? Just finished his sophomore year, right?
Yeah, just finished.
So he'll be a junior. So the 23 track season was a sophomore. So he ran a 10.9 in 2022, which would have meant the spring of his freshman year.
Yeah.
And I believe he ran a 10.84 this past year. So kid that brings a lot of home run ability to the table, a lot of explosiveness to the table. And you had a chance to sit down with him, and we're going to play that interview next. And then when we're done with that, we are going to go to a mailbag. So we'll still be here. Obviously, we're going to have Ryan's interview coming up. We'll still be here starring questions. So if you guys have some questions, we've already got about 8 questions starred. Most of the chat have been complaining and arguing and things like that. We get the questions in so we can move on to the mailbag. But Ryan, here is the interview that you had with Justin Thurman. And then when we get back from it, Ryan, we'll just talk about it just a little bit and then move on to the mailbag. So here you go. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. This is probably my favorite thing to do, give you all a little bit of insight into some of the top football players across the nation. Of course, on Notre Dame's radar, Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at IrishBreakdown.com. I am pleasured and fortunate enough to be joined by Justin Thurman, who was one of the top running backs in the 2025 class, one of the top targets for the University of Notre Dame out of Tampa Jesuit, obviously down in the state of Florida, was just at Notre Dame a couple weeks ago, was able to compete out there and kind of showcase. And if you guys haven't seen his film yet, expect obviously a lot more touches in 2023, but man, one of the fastest players in high school football. Talking to him right now. Justin, appreciate you for joining the show, man. How's everything been going? I know it's been a little crazy for you, man.
No problem. Glad to be here, and everything's been going great.
I love it, man. I love it. So, Justin, let me talk a little bit about the Notre Dame trip, and then we'll get into just kind of the whole recruiting side of things, because I know it's been super busy, a lot of visits on top of preparing for your junior year, obviously, with your team and everything. So, yes. Take me through that. That was your first visit to Notre Dame, if I have it correct, right? That was the first one?
Yes.
So what, outside of just the ability to compete with all the other great talents that were on the scene and everything, what was your first trip like? Like, just to kind of explain just kind of your initial thoughts of Notre Dame when you first got on campus in South Bend.
Well, I mean, my first initial thought when I first got there, it was, very historical campus. I believe that, when I first got onto the campus, they have a lot of history. So, the campus is, they have modernized a couple of things, but they really like to keep the history there and just show the greatness and success of what Notre Dame holds.
Well, and I would love to hear, because there's a lot of different perspectives usually that you can take from getting to campus. Who made the trip with you? Did parents make it this time?
Yes. So my mom and dad went on the trip with me.
They both went there. Okay. So I'm curious, one, if they've ever been to Notre Dame before, and two, to the follow-up to that, what was their impression? Because I know obviously it's a little bit different for a little bit of an older generation, because your parents grew up when Notre Dame was like the golden standard of college football, right? Like they were constantly winning national championships. What was their perspective on Notre Dame visiting there?
Well, first, it was their first time going up to Notre Dame as well. And two, their impression was, they were very impressed, as like I was, with not only just the athletic parts of it, but definitely the academics and just the whole environment in total. It's very, very impressive. It's a very amazing school.
Well, and I know that one of the publisher here at IrishBreakdown.com, Brian Driscoll, I know that he was present during your performance, obviously, at the Irish Invasion. So I want to hear about just how you felt like everything went. I have seen not only just from our platform, but like multiple platforms to kind of put you up as like one of the winners of the day, one of the guys that really had a great workout, obviously. What was the just overall takeaways from competing and being able to camp at Notre Dame?
Well, the first thing was, it was a great opportunity to work with Coach McCullough, the running backs coach, just being able to see the way that he coaches, get some feedback from him, and just learn more about Notre Dame through the camp. But also, too, it was just a great opportunity and a great camp to compete and get some of the best linebackers in the country. And there was people there from everywhere. So it was good to compete against people that are from all over the country.
Yeah, I think that there was, if I remember correctly, over 160 players that were on campus that weekend.
Yes.
I guess just kind of that impression, man. I know that you talked about working with Coach McCullough, and I know that he brings a great reputation, obviously, as a running back coach and developer. What has your relationship been like with Coach McCullough? Because I know context a little bit limited with you being a 2025, but the opportunities you do get to talk to Coach McCullough and the Notre Dame staff, what have that relationship building been like for you?
The relationship is great, honestly. They're very, very insightful and informative of their information. I mean, they believe that I'm a Notre Dame guy, and that I fit the program not only in the athletics part, but in just the whole, just as a whole fit, basically in terms of academics and the social part too. And they were very impressed by what I showed at the camp, and basically they just wanted to continue to build a relationship and just continue to grow and just see where it goes.
Well, you do sound, and this is just my opinion, you sound like a very articulate young man. I know that where you go to school is a high academic school, obviously, right? They take academics very serious down there. So let me ask, just as far as what you're looking for in a school, and we'll get kind of more into the broad strokes of the recruiting side of things. What are some things that are important to you, family-wise? Like, what are you guys as a family and you as an individual, what are you trying to find in a prospective school?
Well, the main thing is school with strong academics. Definitely, that's the main part of going to school, is to get an education. So that's definitely a key factor into seeing what's a fit or not. Too, if the coaching staff has a good chemistry with not only each other, but with the players too. Because if they don't have a good relationship with some of the coaches or even the players too, it's not a well-oiled machine, and it just won't put the team and the whole program in the best position for success. And then just in terms of environment, it's just an environment that I would feel comfortable going to school in and spending 3 to 4 years in.
So you are one of the more gifted athletes that I have seen on film of any running back in the 2025 class. I mean, I know that you have reported like what 4.31 in the 40-yard dash. Like, you're a incredibly gifted athlete. Take me through a little bit of your athletic background, I guess, Justin. Like, has football always been the main sport? What other sports have you played in? Was there a moment for you when you were just kind of like, oh, yeah, I could play major Division I football. Like, this is a possibility for me.
So I've basically been playing football since, like, I would say probably about second grade. I've been playing flags, and I played flags starting second grade, and then started playing tackle when I was in 5th grade. And then, but also too, I've been doing karate pretty much, I don't know, probably as long as I can remember. And I'm actually a 3rd degree black belt in martial arts. So I've been doing that pretty much my whole life. But then starting my freshman year, I started running track and just utilizing that part to help me just build up my speed and just showcase what I can do on the track. And I've been to the state championships in my freshman year, and PR'd, and I actually had a PR this year of 10.84 in the 100. And then for our 4x1, we broke the school record 3 times, and that's actually 3 times in a row. So, and
nice.
That was pretty cool to do that. And it's been great. I mean, honestly, I really like track, and I don't do karate as much due to my schedule, but I do enjoy that as well.
Well, that's very interesting, man. I mean, the track background is no surprise. And for people out there, I coached track for a long time. 10.84 FAT time as a sophomore is a very good time, just for people that maybe aren't into track scene as much. Karate is a really interesting background, man. I wasn't expecting you to say that one. I really wasn't. It sounds like, and I would love a little background here, just so Notre Dame fans get to know you a little bit. Where does this athleticism come from, Justin? Are you like the abnormal one in the family? Do you come from a super athletic family? Like, where do you get this athleticism from?
Well, my dad actually played football at the Florida A&M University. And also, too, my mother played soccer in high school. So, I mean, I guess I just get that from there, too. But I also just been working super hard just to push myself to be the best athlete I can be, and just, put myself in the best position for success.
I wanted to ask about Tampa Jesuit, because I've heard a lot of great things about the school, just from an academic perspective, from an athletic perspective. Sounds like there's and I know I heard you talk to Brian Smith about this, as far as like the key, I guess the key things that you guys really hold close to you, right? Like the key standards and those types of things, the core standards, I should say. Take me through what it's like being a part of that program, being a student athlete down there in Tampa.
I mean, the first thing is always just to work hard. I mean, success doesn't come without hard work, and we as a school and as a football program believe that with working hard, results will show for themselves. And then also too, well, being a man for others, that's definitely a key factor, or just a thing for the Jesuit schools, because that's basically kind of like our motto. Just being there for others and helping people through tough times, or being there just in others in general. And then just the brotherhood, I would say definitely that's a main key too, to having a strong brotherhood, having good connections with each other, and just being good peers, and just to each other, so that we could just build relationships and just have those for the rest of our lives even.
So I think it's really incredible. You just finished up your sophomore year of high school. You're about to be a junior. You're training for junior season of high school. And then I look at this offer list, Justin, where I'm like, Notre Dame, Kansas, Kansas State, Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, Louisville, UCF, Iowa, all the way down, Purdue, Indiana. There are so many incredible programs, institutions that have offered you the ability to play football and to be a student athlete at their institution. Just incredible. Is there any surrealness to this at any point yet, man? I mean, I know you're still going to be bringing in a lot more offers and everything, but I mean, you are being courted by some of the top programs in the country. Just kind of how has recruiting been, I guess, early on, just with that in mind?
Well, it's definitely been a blessing being able to receive those opportunities from some of those schools. Well, all those schools basically. It's definitely been a blessing just to go through the process and being able to receive the opportunities that I have received, because I know that not everybody gets that opportunity to play or even go to that school at that level too as well. And it's just been a blessing. I just always tell myself to keep working no matter what I have or what I don't have, and just the grind doesn't stop, and just always be grateful for what I have.
Yeah, and obviously the grind is continuing, because now we're talking about you getting ready for the football season, and want to talk a little bit about just what it's been like on the recruiting trail for you, taking these visits to places. I mentioned the Notre Dame visit, but obviously I know you've been to some other campuses already. What may have been some of your, I guess, more favorite visits you've been on? A couple places that I guess are really cool opportunities so far that you've been able to see.
So all the visits I've taken that have been great, honestly. They've been all insightful about how they run the programs, how I would be a fit, and just the overall atmosphere of that certain school. I would say definitely. I mean, and can't really choose between which one. I mean, they all been amazing, and they've been great, and just I would say very insightful to the evaluation part of deciding wherever I want to go to school.
I can totally get that, man. And again, looking at the impressive offer list you have, I know it's hard to even pick between some of these great places that you've been, obviously. Well, let me ask you, Justin, about your season that you have coming up. I know that you are projected to have, obviously, a great season. I know you play for a very talented football team. How has this offseason been, just being able to train with your guys and be able to get back and really be able to get ready for this 2023 season that's coming up very soon? I mean, we're only like 50-something days away or something like that. It's pretty crazy.
So I would say it's definitely been great. We have a lot of younger guys too. So the last, I'd say 2 years, the senior class, we had a lot of seniors on our team that have graduated. So we have a lot of young guys, but I think that's a good thing, being able to develop them and get them in the right position. And also too, I believe that with this class coming in too as well, the class of 2027, I feel like we can put something together that'll be great and put us in the best position for success. And I believe that I think we all have all the pieces. We just need to put them together so that we can succeed.
And with that wanting to succeed and be able to put all the pieces together with some of the younger guys, are there any goals that you have set as far as like individually, team wise? Like what would make 2023 season a success in your opinion?
I would say, to continue to fine tune the skills that I have personally, and then also too for the team, just winning game after game after game, and being able to get to the playoffs, and then win those games, and then eventually go on to state and attempt to win that game too.
So I played college football, but I was on a much lower level. I was not nearly as gifted an athlete as you are. So I remember trying to balance school and playing football and talking to coaches, and it was difficult for me at a lower level, right? Like I was getting recruited by some D2, some FCS, but like D3 schools, like lower levels. For you, especially at such a young age, how do you feel like you've been able to balance it all, man? Because I mean, I know it's a grind. I know you're constantly getting hit up. I know you're being asked to come visit this school, that school. How have you been able to balance being a student athlete and still being a recruit as well? I'm just fascinated by that.
I would say the main thing is not overloading myself. Just taking the time with each certain school, but also too with my own football schedule, laying out basically a whole basically I would say itinerary, so that basically I don't feel I would say just stressed and feel like I'm doing things at the last minute. I like to have them pre-planned and so I can just check something off the list or something like that. And being able to basically have it pre-planned so that I'm not rushing to do things that just on the list, so I can just check them and then just move on to the next thing. So, but I try not to overload myself with things, but also to just have a little like checklist or just a list of things I need to get done so that I can move on to the next.
Then my last question for you is, as far as timelines are concerned and over the next couple months, like what do the next couple months look like for you? Is there a timeline that you have currently where you would like to make a decision? Is this just kind of feeling it out? Like what is kind of just the next few months like for you?
I would say the timeline for me is I would say just over the next couple of months. Right now, I'm doing or having more in-depth conversations on how I would fit into the program and what certain things would be good for me, and just what each school has to not to offer, but just what schools have some stuff that would help better myself in both the academics and the athletics, and just taking the time to continue to evaluate and have those conversations and then eventually make a decision on where I want to go to school.
Well, again, joined here by Justin Thurman, star running back in the 2025 class, key target for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish as well, fresh off of a great performance at the Irish Invasion a few weeks ago. Justin, I really appreciate it again, man. I know that this has been a very hectic time. We're also coming up on 4th of July, so throw in a holiday there as well, man. But thank you so much for joining the show. I thank you very much for that, because I know it's been incredibly busy, man. But really appreciate just a little bit of the insight you were able to give today.
All good. I'm glad to have the conversation with you.
So there you go, Ryan. That was your conversation with Justin Thurman. So just some takeaways from getting a chance to sit down with him and just share your thoughts. Obviously,
I mean, one of the more well-spoken kids I've ever talked to in my entire life, and that is including NFL draft prospects that I've interviewed in the past. It includes NFL players I've interviewed in the past. It includes college kids and high school kids. I mean, this kid is a sophomore in high school going on 40. Like that's kind of what he seems like to me, Brian, right? Like I think he has a very good understanding of what he's good at, what he needs to improve on. And he brings kind of that personality to the table of just very well spoken. I mean, he's talking about planning things out. He's talking about, the core values that his school brings to the table. He's talking about the recruiting process and how blessed he is, but also what he's looking for. Like, just a very well-spoken young man, which, again, we're talking about a kid that Notre Dame is high on. He's also high on Notre Dame, and it shouldn't be a surprise after hearing him speak. Like, he's just one of those kids that is mature by his years, in my opinion.
So we'll obviously have a lot more in his recruitment moving forward. This is a kid that Notre Dame has identified as one of the top backs in the class. I would say that right now Notre Dame's probably recruiting him and Usman Kroma probably harder than anybody else in the class of running back. So they really like him. They liked him before the visit, Ryan, but I think seeing him work out, seeing his build, he's actually a lot more muscular than I thought he was going to be watching his sophomore film. He seems to have filled out a little bit. The staff getting a chance to watch him work out, to see the explosiveness. He had one of the best 40 times to camp. His broad jump was he was one of there was two kids, Ryan, and he was one of them that almost out jumped the end of the thing where they had the measurement. Like they didn't have it far enough and he almost jumped past it. So I think that sold them on him. So I think those are the two kids that they're looking at. And I think they'd like to add a guy that's got some speed, some explosiveness. You got two outstanding backs in last year's class. Neither of them are what you would call like burner types.
Right.
So he's a kid that's got some of that ability as well. So Justin Thurman's a name that Notre Dame fans are going to want to know in the 25 class. And there's a lot of them. And we've been wanting to do a show starting to introduce you to the 25 class. It's like every weekend there's some sort of big thing that happens that makes us have to postpone that. We're going to try to get back to that next week and start introducing that. And hopefully there's no bad news that comes up between now and then. And we'll be able to
if we have to pivot. Yeah.
Well, if it's good news, we'll kind of do it that day. So that,
Right.
That's always nicer to do. So we're going to go to the mailbag next, Ryan. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. If they're Notre Dame fans and they don't listen to Irish Breakdown, you got to let them know. You got to listen to Irish Breakdown. We also launched our first Southeastern recruiting shows today. They're not on the podcast platform yet, but we did get a couple on the YouTube channel. The Brian Smith broke down the Southeastern 2024 quarterbacks, and then also kicked off the 2025 Florida, not even Southeastern, because there's so many big time receivers in Florida in 25. He's got a 3-part show that went up on that today as well. So part 1 went up today as well. So a lot more going on. We've got some college football topics we're going to be getting in here soon, and all that kind of good stuff. So definitely make sure that you're locked in. And of course, folks, hit that sign up for the boards at irishbreakdown.com. We've had a ton of signups this month, last few weeks. So people I think are starting to get a little fired up about the season. And so make sure you're locked into there. Some people will steal the NFL because they're losers and have nothing else better to do, but you guys will get it first when you're on the message board at irishbreakdown.com. So it's message board time, Ryan. And so we're going to just dive right in. We've got some super chats here at the very top. If you want to go ahead and read these bad boys, and we'll get it rocking and rolling here.
Sounds good. First one is from Rob Osgood. Rob, thank you so much as always for the super chat. You're right. Just win, prove your worth on the field. I hope when Notre Dame plays Ohio State this year, they have Notre Dame versus Miami attitude. Just dominate and show the world. Rest will take care of itself, in my opinion.
Yes, Notre Dame, Miami in 88-90, not 2017. Let's make sure we get the right Notre Dame. Maybe 2012 would be even better. Obviously, it's funny, Ryan. My wife bought me a Catholics First Convicts shirt, and I just got it today, this morning. Nice. So she had never watched the show Catholics First Convicts. Yeah. And I made the comment to her, like, I always wish I would have had one of those. So apparently there's this company that still sells them in the original form, like with the unfinished business in the front and Catholic First Convicts in the back. So she bought me one of those. I thought that was hilarious.
That's awesome.
So I'm going to get that. I'm going to get that framed and hung up in the man cave down here in the office, so I can always be looking at it right here while we're doing our show. Thank you for the super chat, Rob.
Good note on not 2017 though. I've tried to block that game out of my mind, and it still has not been blocked yet. So
absolutely.
We had another super chat from Raymond Harton. Raymond, thank you so much. Just for support. Can't wait for the season to start. Have a great 4th of July, IB Nation. You as well, Raymond. Thank you so much for that.
I'll get this next one, Ryan. This is from Wade Garrett, because he says, thank you for the super chat, Wade. But he said, nice interview, Ryan. Always a great job. Yes,
thank
absolutely.
You so
I'm going to take this one too, Ryan. Guys, James O'Reilly, I appreciate the super chat. I do. But we're not going to get into conversations about coaches moving on after a season that hasn't even started yet. My focus right now with Al Washington is solely on go out there and coach the heck out of the defensive line this year. That's all I care about. I don't care about anything else other than that. That's out of my control. It's out of your control. I'm not going to sit here and worry about a short list for a coach that I care about what he's going to do out there and do this fall. That's all that matters. If Marcus Freeman ever decides to move on from Al Washington, or if Al Washington decides to move on somewhere else, then we'll address who his replacement might be. But right now, Al Washington is a defensive line coach at Notre Dame. We're going to praise him for the things he did well, like we did about the job he did with the defensive lineman this spring, the job he did with Logan Thomas, the job he did with Cole Mullins. And we'll criticize him with the things that he deserves to be criticized for, like Justin Scott, like the Owen Wafel decision. And when he does what he needs to do and things don't work out, and it's, it is what it is. That's just one of the breaks, like Elijah Rushing, Keon Keeley will say that too. We'll always give him a fair shake, but right now the focus is on the job he does this season. That's all that matters. We don't get into the whole fire this coach. Look, I've been fired as a coach before. It sucks having to go home and tell your wife, hey, sorry, I know you finally got comfortable here, but you know what I mean? And I know it's easy for people on a message board to say, fire this guy, fire that guy, for the other guy. We don't do that here. Number one, I think it lacks tact, number one. And number two, whether we think a person should get fired or not is irrelevant because we have no say on it. And so we're just not going to waste our time with that kind of stuff. So I didn't want to be disrespectful to James and ignore your super chat. And we've had other people. And the reason also partly I wanted to bring it up is because we've had other people ask it. Guys, we just don't do that here. We don't call for coaches to get fired. When we say a change needs to be made, we're very clear. Change doesn't always mean a coach gets fired. Kerry Cook's got off to a bit of a rough start recruiting at Notre Dame too. Brian Kelly had a heart-to-heart with him. We'll just leave it at that. And his recruiting got better, right? So that's the reality of it, and that's what the focus is going to be on. But we're not going to sit here and talk about they need to fire him and who'd you brace them so they fire him. The season hasn't even started yet. Like, let's get through the season first and see how it goes. Because if Riley Mills goes out there and does what I think he's capable of doing, and Jordan Patelho balls out, and Javonte Jean-Baptiste has a big year, and the young guys are getting coached up, and all of a sudden Notre Dame's defensive line is elite, do you really want to go out there and fire the coach that led to that? Is that really what? No. Fix the recruiting part. Fix the recruiting part. Figure out a way to get him to put in the work for all recruits that he does for the Elijah Rushings and the Cole Mullinses and the Logan Thomases, guys that have praised the job that Coach Washington did. That's the issue with him. It's weird. It's a consistency. It's like you totally bungled this one, and you did a great job here. If you would have recruited, here's a reality. I'll put it out there right now. If Al Washington would have recruited Justin Scott the way that he recruited Elijah Rushing, I think Justin Scott's in this class right now. I definitely think Malachi Williams might be in this class. I feel really good about the potential of Malachi Williams being in the class right now if you would have recruited him the way you recruited Elijah Rushing, right? So it's those issues. I know he can do it. That's partly what makes it so frustrating is because you don't see him do it in other situations, Ryan. And that's the thing that just, I mean, honestly, just kind of drives me nuts. If he would have recruited Jason Moore the way that he recruited Elijah Rushing, I think Jason Moore's in this class. And then I don't really care if they lost it. I mean, I care if they lost Justin Scott, but they're fine because they'd have Jason Moore in last year's class. Yeah. So it just fix it. Be more consistent. And one of the questions we had, Ryan, and we'll just kind of talk about it now because it's relevant to now because I think it's fair to address. Beefeater asks, goes, Brian and Ryan, what exactly is Al Washington doing wrong? Does he just not connect with these kids? Does he pick his nose too much? Is he distracted by what? Bad breath. So there's something that happened with Justin Scott that we're just not going to get into publicly. And if we do share it, it'll be around signing day that we'll get into. Okay. But let's address this, Ryan. What does he do wrong? It really comes down to a lack of consistency, right? I mean, right. Ryan, there will be kids that will just say, yeah, I don't talk to him very much. Or, hey, he talked to me. It'll be, hey, I hear from him every week. And then we check up on the kid of what means, yeah, I haven't heard from him in a while. There's this weird lack of consistency where he'll crush one recruitment. And it's like, there was a time when Ryan would call me and be like, dude, I talked to Marquise Lightfoot and he talks to Al Washington more than he talks to Justin Scott.
Oh, easy. Like every other day.
Al Washington talks to Marquise Lightfoot more than he talks to Justin Scott, a guy that the rest of the staff was like, we're not pushing for that guy. Make that make sense for me. So it's stuff like that, right? It's almost like, a little kid has ADD. He just can't focus on one thing. That's like Al Washington on the recruiting trail. He just can't focus. It's just inconsistent. It's just, there's a situation the other day where there's something had gone on and just forgot to tell somebody. So there's all these weird things that you hear, and it's just like, is this dude not able to concentrate? Is he not able to focus? Like, what's going on here? Because the lack of consistency in communication, it's like the guy that, like, who's this guy? Like, I don't know who this guy is because when you're handling this recruitment, it's like a completely different person. Yeah, it's weird. Like it's the strain. I've never seen a coach like that because usually when a coach isn't good, like Al Golden just doesn't work. It's as simple as that. He just doesn't work. There's an apathy there when it comes to recruiting that's mind-boggling that you can be that way, but we can identify it. It's very easy to identify because when Al Golden actually puts in work as a recruiter, he's pretty good.
He's good. Yeah, he's good. Yeah.
He just doesn't work. Yeah. With Al Washington, it's like, I don't know how he's going to handle this recruitment. Is he – because he's so schizophrenic when it comes to it. That's the big thing for me. And then he just makes a lot of unforced errors because of that lack of focus and ability to just consistently day after day do his job.
It is really weird. I mean, just kind of thinking back to some of the conversations, Brian, it's like, I even put it like this, folks, like there's levels to how you recruit as far as, your top priority kids and then the kids that are secondary and then a little bit more of the bottom of the board kids, right? And obviously you would think, and this should be how it is that the priority kids are the ones that you're talking to the most, right? And then it kind of trickles down from there. But you'll have kids like in the top group where you're like, one kid, he'll hear from him every other day, right? And then there'll be other kids that you only hear from them once every couple weeks or once a month type of situation. And I fully understand that kids are different, right? There's some recruits that you don't need to micromanage as much, right? Like you don't need to talk to him as much. Like Charles Jagasaw was a kid, right? Where it's like, Harry, he said you could talk to him once a month because like Charles doesn't need that, right? Like he doesn't need that constant conversation, right? Like some kids are like that. But some of the kids that you are not consistent enough with are the ones that you have lost, right? And so to Beefeater's question, I think it's very fair. It has nothing to do with connections with kids. I have never heard a single recruit when they speak about Al Washington say like, I just don't really connect with him, right? Like he's not really engaging, or it's always very positive as far as his personality, how he talks to them. It's just to Brian's point. It's like you can't have one priority kid hear from him every other day, and then another priority kid hear from once every 2 weeks, once every two times each month. Like it can't happen that way, and it does for whatever reason. So yeah, it's definitely the consistency factor. I think that's easily the main one. I've never smelled his breath, so I don't know if that's part of it.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I do. I do. It's puzzling. Like I've literally never seen anything like it. It's odd. It's really odd.
It's really odd. We had a super chat from Cody Stanfield. Thank you so much, Cody. He said, missed on Justin Scott. Where do we go from here?
That's not something we really addressed during the show, Ryan. And I think the biggest thing is it's similar to the approach on the receiver. It's like, just be patient. It's not a great defensive tackle class. That's also so partly what made Justin Scott such a big recruit is like Justin Scott's not Keon Keeley. He's not.
Right.
It's like I know he's ranked in the top. There's a big difference between Justin Scott and Keon Keeley. I think Justin Scott is a 5-star player because he's got 5-star talent. He doesn't necessarily produce like a 5-star yet, but with good coaching, he can get there. There's no question. The fact that he's local, he's from Chicago, he's at a private school, a Catholic school, all that stuff mattered. But the other part of it too, Ryan, is it's a bad defensive tackle class. Yeah. And a couple of the kids that Notre Dame liked weren't fits or couldn't get into school. And when there's not a lot of numbers anyway, and then a couple other kids they liked are NIL kids. I mean, just flat out, not even hiding it. I want an NIL payout. It is what it is. So you move on from those kids. There's not a lot of places to go when it comes to replacing him in the class. There's nobody on his level. So again, go out. There's a couple things they could maybe do that we won't get into, but go out and put a good product on the field. See if you can strike up some interest with some other players. But what I would not do, Ryan, is not panic and say, hey, look, we're going to go out there and because we got to get a 5th guy. No, just recruit, just keep the guys you have. And then if you can add a comparable talent, go get them. You've already screwed this up enough by dropping Owen Wafel, right? That was bad enough because if he was still in the class, they're fine. Focus on the 2025 class. If the depth becomes an issue, go out and get a portal kid. I mean, that or some sleeper with a high ceiling down the stretch. Because circling back to guys like Benedict Ume, it's kind of like, you look at him like, man, I wasn't super high on that kid, but he's better than nobody. I think I said that to you last night. But at the end of the day, you don't just take a kid that you don't think can play. I mean, that's the other part of it. So be patient, let the process play out. Consider the portal. Maybe there's a kid like the cat from Western Michigan that went to Florida State that you can maybe do a better job of next year, and get that kid, something like that. What was the kid's name again, Ryan?
Braden Fisk.
Fisk. Yeah. So, and the other part too is like the receiver position, you're going to lose Howard Cross after this year.
Yep.
You might lose Riley Mills after this year. But other than that, everybody you have at defensive tackle is very young. And you just brought in a defensive end class that's probably going to have at least one of those guys that's going to move inside. Devin Houston comes back from injury. Gabriel Rubio still has multiple years of eligibility left. Jason Onye has multiple years of eligibility left. Donovan Heinrich still has 4 years of eligibility left. Tyson Ford has 4 years of eligibility left. You have Devin Houston will have 4 years of eligibility left, maybe 5. And then if one of the defensive ends in the 23 class moves inside, he's going to have years left. And then You've got Sean Silviano, and then I still think there's a chance that Bryce Young eventually outgrows it either. But what I don't want to hear is if Bryce Young does outgrow it big end and becomes a great 3 technique, well, this is why you're fine missing. No, you should have had both, right? I mean, I can't stand that. But the point is there's options. They don't need to panic and just take a guy, but because there really aren't a lot of those guys in this class. I mean, there's other guys like, oh, maybe to get TJ Lindsey. TJ Lindsey's not Justin Scott. Right. He's not.
Good player, though. Yeah.
Right. Very good player. And Notre Dame liked him, but he just was looking for other things. You know what I mean? That Notre Dame's just not going to play that game. So, and that's fine. TJ's a good kid from everything you've told me, Ryan. It just,
I like TJ. Yeah.
Kids are just, and it's okay. It's not a bad thing. If the kid's like, hey, I want an iPad. Okay. At least he's honest about it. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I have no ill will towards that. As long as you're straight up with people about it.
Yeah.
So I don't really know, Ryan, if there is anywhere to go from here other than just focus on putting a good product on the field and tell Chad Bowden and the recruiting staff to keep their eyes open for some sleeper that's going to break out. You know, if you can find a Brandon Hillman type guy or a Caleb Smith type guy in the defensive tackle position, that's about all I can say to do at this point.
That's where I would go with it, because I don't know if you noticed, Brian, but like a lot of the interior defensive linemen in 2024 also are like tweener kids, you know, where it's like it's a lot of 265-pound kids that you're rejecting to eventually be that guy. And it's like you already have a bunch of those kids, right? Like you already have one. The problem with Justin Scott was not only is he a 5-star level talent from a raw skills perspective, he's also 305 pounds, right? Like that was the biggest sell. It's like that kid's 6'4", 6'5", 305 pounds. Like there's just not a lot of those guys walking around in the 2024 class. I mean, outside of like Aiden Breland from, out in California from Modern Day, there's just not a lot of those guys this year where you're like, that is what a defensive tackle looks like. That's how you draw it up in a lab. I mean, yes, Edric Houston and all those cats are really good, but like even Edric Houston's like 6'3", 255 right now. Like they're not the size profile that you would necessarily are trying to find in this class for a guy like a Justin Scott. So I would like to see how things develop as well. Not necessarily even sleeper. Like I would just like to see a couple of these kids that are even, on the board at all, just kind of see how their body fills out this offseason and how they look like early in the season. Because taking another 265 pounds, maybe interior player is not really helping you, in my opinion, because you're going to get too many of those tweener kids at some point.
I want to put this out there too. David Jones says, after what happened with Scott, I sincerely hope that this wasn't a case of OSU negatively recruiting against Notre Dame. Marcus Freeman and James Ioannidis are considered best friends, so I hope that wasn't something there. I have heard there's a lot of staffs that do negative recruiting. I've heard very little from this Ohio State staff about negative recruiting. They don't have to.
No.
Like, here's the thing, guys. Pointing out that you're better than Notre Dame in this area, that's not negative recruiting. That's the facts. We put way more guys in the NFL than Notre Dame. That's not negative recruiting. That's called the truth. Hey, we were a point away from, we were 2 points away from beating Georgia last year. The last time Notre Dame was in the playoff, they got beat by 17, and it wasn't that close. That's not negative recruiting. That's the truth.
And Justin Scott talked a lot about Larry Johnson. It's like,
exactly.
Hey, man,
Ohio
Larry
State
Johnson's
is selling Ohio
is...
State, Ryan. That's what they're doing. They don't need to negatively recruit Notre Dame. They are selling, hey, here's who we are. That's who Notre Dame is. You choose. They don't need to do that. And I have not yet heard a single scenario from any recruit, maybe you have, Ryan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, where that's happened. I've heard of coaches who are no longer on the staff now, but coaches who used to be on the staff that would do more negative recruiting towards Ohio State than Ohio State did to Notre Dame because they had to, because they didn't have a better product to sell. And so, no, I haven't heard that at all because they don't need to. Like that would be like Notre Dame lost a recruit in the last couple of years from a coach who is no longer here, and he never coached for Marcus Freeman. So, but they lost a kid because the Notre Dame assistant was talking negative about the Ohio State assistant, trying to tear him down. And the kid was like, I was getting ready to commit to you, but I love that guy. And what you're saying about him is false. And so that kid ends up not being really turned off by that Notre Dame coach, and he commits to the school that the Notre Dame coach was negatively recruiting against.
Stupid.
Right? Like, dude, you didn't need to do that. You're Notre Dame. Ohio State's the same way. Most of the negative recruiting I see is from Southern schools. That's where most of the negative recruiting comes from. And it's with Southern kids. You don't want to go up there. It's too cold. Then they'll make up, the academics too hard. You can't succeed there. Those coaches are this, there's those. and then they'll negatively recruit. I can't tell you the last time I heard about Ohio State negatively recruiting against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And them saying, hey, here's our plan for you, and we have a much greater track record of putting guys in the NFL is not negative recruiting. Look, negative recruiting is not speaking the truth. You may not like it. It may make you feel negative, but it's not negative. It's the truth. And so they just got beat. Simple as that. But I just want to make sure, because I've heard a couple other people say that. I've heard nothing about Ohio State being negative towards Notre Dame. They were just selling their product, and that's all they needed to do at the end of the day. All right.
We had our next question from Jordan Schreiber. What's up, Jordan? If Notre Dame misses on Kingston, Viliamo Asa, and Bradley Shaw, how do you feel about defensive recruiting then?
Why don't you go and take first shot at that, Ryan, because it's not good.
Jordan, yeah, I mean, it's not good. I mean, that's exactly what was in my mind, Jordan. Like, it was one of those situations, defensive recruiting wise, where you had several cogs that were about to get knocked down this offseason, right? You talked about Justin Scott. You talked about now with Kingston. You talked about Bradley Shaw. You talked about maybe flipping Caleb Beasley down the road. Davis Andrews, obviously at safety, is another kid that we've talked about in the past a ton. And if you would have hit 3 out of 5 of those, you felt pretty okay about the class, right? If you hit more than that, it's like you feel very good about the class. Now you're in a situation with Justin Scott off the board, you have to rethink what defensive line recruiting is going to be the rest of the way, because I still think it's necessary that eventually you do get another interior defensive lineman to go with Sean Sevillano. I think that would be the best possible scenario. But if you miss on Kingston and Bradley Shaw, now you're looking and saying interior defensive line class is one, it's weak in terms of depth. You only have one player, and you need to get better and more impactful in the interior defensive line. Linebackers, if you miss on Kingston and Bradley Shaw, and that's a below average linebacker group in that situation. And you're already a below average safety group. So yeah, cornerback is good. Edge is very good so far in the 2024 class for Notre Dame. But then you're talking about 3 out of 5 of those groups potentially being average to below average. And that's obviously not where you need to be if you're Notre Dame.
I'm going to somewhat disagree with you a little bit, Ryan. I understand the sentiment of where you're coming from, but I just have a hard time looking at a safety class with Bronte Johnson and Kennedy Urlacher's below average. Now, if you're going to talk about, to me, more than half of the schools in college football would gladly take that group. I think for me, where my criticism comes down to, it's not good enough if you're talking about competing for a championship. If you're going to say, if you take the 10 best teams in college football, and does this linebacker class stack up with them? I'd say no. So if you were to maybe narrow the focus of who you consider, like if you're ranking the top 10 to 20 and it's below average there, no, but you can't, to me, I can't accept the notion that it's average related to the rest of college football, because there's
it's average to Notre Dame standards, though.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Then that's fair. And to me, so we're kind of on the same page. I just kind of felt like below average just came across as too strong, because. But if you're talking about
not
the
below
Notre Dame
average
standard,
to 132,
okay,
below average to Notre Dame, what you're
then
trying
we're
to
pretty
shoot
much
for.
on the same page, right? Because it's not good enough, right? I mean, if you like I like Bodie Cahoon's upside. I really like Teddy Rezak's upside. But again, what is a championship caliber linebacker class? It's Jordan it's Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, and Junior Tuihalamaka. It's Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, and Preston Zinter, right? That's what a championship caliber linebacker class looks like. If you strike out on all your top guys, I like Bodie, I like Teddy. They need to be like 2 and 3, 3 and 4, not 1 and 2, to your point. And so when you talk about, is this closing the gap? No, it's widening the gap between those top. Even with Bronte in the class, I like Kennedy Urlacher more than most, Ryan. But all along, I've said Kennedy needs to be your third safety. Right now, to a degree, I would argue that they were at safety recruiting for all the issues with Chris O'Leary. Again, forget the process and just looking at the end result. They were kind of stung a little bit by something that was outside of their control. Because if they get Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher, and Davis Andrews, I'm loving this safety class. And I think they've got a great shot to get Davis Andrews, but he's just going to reclassify to 26. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that, Ryan, but I'd love that safety class. Now, I would say don't get confused by the process still being flawed, because, you know what I mean? Like, at different parts of it. But my whole point is it's not good enough. That needs to get fixed, and it's below the standard that Marcus Freeman has set at line. Marcus Freeman set the standard at linebacker recruiting, flat out. This is the standard because linebacker recruiting had been struggling at Notre Dame for years. They'd have like a couple classes here and there that would kind of salvage them, a little bit, but overall it was just way too inconsistent.
Right.
Then you come out and Marcus Freeman says, no, this is what you're capable of doing, recruiting linebackers at Notre Dame. And his replacement at the position has not lived up to that standard. And so to me, that it's got to get better. Now, if you get Kingston Viliama-Asa to go with Bodie and Teddy, I'm good with that. I am.
That's a good class.
Because you ended up with a pretty good class. Now Teddy and Bodie can be where you want them to be, which is, below a Kingston. But, man, now the ceiling, there's a little less pressure on them. The ceiling is higher for those guys. Kingston's one of the highest floor linebackers you've landed in a couple years. He's in that top group of floor. I don't know if I'd say his ceiling is quite as high as maybe like a Jalen Sneed or a Drake Bowen. But, man, the floor is really high and the ceiling is close. I feel much better about that. If you get Bradley Shaw, it's a typical Brian Kelly linebacker class, to be honest with you. Pre-Marcus Freeman linebacker class. And that's the one thing Coach can't allow to happen, Ryan, is he can't allow those positions to go back to what they were before. Safety's been an issue for years. I can't figure that one out, Ryan. I don't get it. It's been going on for years. Yeah. Mike Elko got Kyle Hamilton. Outside of that, he got Derek Hamilton. He got Derek Allen. Derek Allen ended up being a bust, but that was a big time pickup. Outside of that, safety recruiting for years has been weird.
Not great,
despite the success for the NFL success. So I can't address that one. But man, it would be a disappointing class if you miss on those kids. It really would, because you would have missed out on your majority of your top targets now at almost every position on the defensive side of the ball, and that's not okay.
Well,
that's not okay.
Brian, we're doing the thing that I always hate so much, right? We're going one side or the other. I'm seeing it, and I saw in the chat a few minutes ago that recruiting has not improved under Marcus Freeman. I'm just like, come on, man.
Nonsense.
That's not right. That's not true. All I'm saying is
this is what bothers me.
Linebacker recruiting needs to be better in 2024. Safety recruiting needs to be better moving forward. Interior defensive line recruiting needs to be better moving forward. Doesn't mean that the full scope is not better. Like, that's ignorant. That's very ignorant in my opinion. It's not. That's not, and it's not truthful. It's just not truthful for being honest.
I'm so tired of those. They're very. Trying to say this without being disrespectful, because I don't want to take a shot at anybody. It's it's just wrong. I mean, they ranked 12th. This is what's so dumb about that. I'm sorry. There's just no way to say it. You can sit there and say that Notre Dame's recruiting class finished 12th, and that doesn't really tell me anything. It really doesn't. Look at the classes. And that's the thing that kind of really gets on my nerves a little bit, is when you hear that kind of stuff. Because I don't care where it ranked last year. Look, Notre Dame's class ranked 12th last year. It was basically on the same exact par as the class the previous year that finished 7th. The class the year before had 22 commits and had 275 points and 91.82 ranking. It finished 7th. The 2023 class finished 12th. It had 272.79 points and a 91.78 ranking, and it finished 12th. Right? So what are we doing here? What are we doing here?
We're also 2 years removed from Texas A&M signing the greatest class ever, and that class ended up not being very good at all.
Correct.
So, let's stop with the rankings.
And half those kids have left. So just to sit there, here's what bothers me. We're all adults, I think, in this chat. And there's some young, not adults in here. Welcome, man. We hope that you learn from the adults who do it the right way. We can sit here and say, this is a problem with Justin Scott. What drives me nuts are the people that jump in here and then just put that on everything. It's like we see what people do to linebacker. Maris had a bad year, so all the linebackers sucked. What? What film are you watching? You know what I mean? And then they'll completely ignore the fact, and I put this in the breakout article the other day. Do you know what J.D. Bertrand? I'm actually going to find that because I want to put the numbers were. But do you know what J.D. Bertrand's numbers would have looked like if he would have played the whole season the way he did in the last 6 games? His numbers at the end of the year, Ryan, would have been 100 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 7 breakups. That's what he did the second half of the season when he finally got a hold of the defense. But just ignore that because I'm in my feelings about how bad Maris played last year, right? I'm in my feelings. I'm all emotional about them missing out on Justin Scott and the reasons for it, and you're okay to feel that way. It's a loss. Yeah. But to then just ignore, this is no different than Brian Kelly recruiting. That's nonsense. Because the two classes that Marcus Freeman has primarily put together, the 22 and 23 classes, were like higher than all but the 2013 class of Brian Kelly's entire tenure at Notre Dame.
Just over emotional is all.
So it's like, get out of your feelings. And if you want, but here's the thing: even if you use the rankings that you obsess over, the story's still the same. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense to have that opinion. And so to me, if you want to be in your feelings and you want to be upset about this, I understand that. I get it. I'm bummed about this recruitment too.
But just be upset about Justin Scott. Don't let it take over your whole view of recruiting in general. That's the big thing. Yeah.
That's the part. Like, here's another example. Rivals last year ranked Notre Dame's 23 class 11th. They had 2,504 points and a 3.83 recruiting ranking, right? The 2022 class finished 6th. They had 24.81 total points, fewer, despite having more commits, and they had a lower per player average of 36.5. Brian Kelly's last recruiting class in 2021 that ranked 9th, 23.78 points. It's over 100 below, and 3.44 per player average. Brian Kelly's 2020 class had, 1975 points, so almost 600 points below, and a 3.59 average. Brian Kelly's 2019 class on Rivals, which ranked 14th, 2,274 points, 3.55. So again, I could really do this all day. 2018 class finished 11th, 2,380 points, 3.44 per player average. 2017 Notre Dame class ranks 13th, 2,144 points, 3.33. So please explain to me, worshipers of recruiting rankings, how you can even use their own rankings and tell me that there's no difference between what Marcus Freeman is doing now and what they did before. Because what we're pissed about them doing now was a great class under Brian Kelly. Facts. If Brian Kelly would have signed the 23 class and had the 24 recruiting now, all the Brian Kelly stands that are now crying about Marcus Freeman, those are the classes you all used to get nuts over when Brian Kelly was the head coach here. Let's be real about that, Ryan. Yeah. Because that's how the bar was lowered. Marcus Freeman raised the bar. And now some other assistants aren't living up to that standard, and he's got to figure that out because he's the head coach. He's the head coach. He's responsible for it. But at the same time, even with those misses, Notre Dame is still on pace for a class in 2024 that is much better than just almost anything Brian Kelly did. Here, right now, if Notre Dame doesn't sign another recruit, they have 2,313 points according to Rivals. That is more, let's go here. That's more than the 2021 class, right? That's more than, I believe, the 2020 class. Yep, that's more. That's 300 over 300 points more than the 2020 class. I believe it's more than the 2019 class. Yep. It's let's see how it compares to the 2018 class. It's almost at where the 2018 class was. It's about 50. What did I say, Ryan? 2,313.
Yes. Yep.
So it's about 67 points below the class in 2018. Which had 27 commits in it. 2017 class, it had 2,144 points, so it's higher than that class. 2016 class, that class for Notre Dame had 2,289 points. Another class that this class is already better than if it doesn't land another player in this class. 2,423, so the 2015 class was higher. That goes away if they get Gearby Lambert. That class also had 4 more kids, so it had 110 points more with 4 more commits than this class. So please explain to me how this recruiting is the same as it was before. Because you know what? Notre Dame's previous staff would have bowed out of the Justin Scott recruitment months ago. months ago. They never would have even been in it. They wouldn't have even gone after Kingston and Viliama-Ast as hard as they did because they just said, hey, we're not going to get a kid from Bosco. We're not even going to try.
Right.
So just if you're going to have a point of view, you can have it. All I ask is you actually have a way to defend it. And the fact is there's nothing beyond emotions to argue that that's accurate, Ryan. And I'm using the rankings that I don't support. But the people making that, because the person making that argument right now in the chat is someone who obsesses over recruiting rankings. Sure. So even looking at the recruiting rankings, there's nothing to back up that point of view. Nothing. And I'm a big fan of, I don't know, facts. I know that's crazy nowadays, Ryan, but I kind of think they're still a cool thing. I don't know about you.
They're okay sometimes.
Except when they don't agree with what I want to.
100%, yeah. I can't win an argument if you don't have the facts on your side. Exactly. George Schreiber question. Who were your favorite targets for John Elway? Ricky Nattiel. What do you think would have happened had Elway had some elite receivers? McCaffrey seems to be the best I can remember. Rod Smith was probably the best.
Yes, right? I was going to say that. Rod Smith, Ed McCaffrey was the bigger name.
Easy Ed was good. He was a good player, man.
He was a very good player, but I would argue that Rod Smith is the best receiver. I would say the best pass catcher that he ever played with was Shannon Sharp.
Yeah, Sharp was great.
Yeah, he was great as well. But I would say Rod Smith is the best receiver he ever played with. I mean, he had the three amigos back in the 80s. Ricky Nattiel had that great rookie year. He never really did much after that. People forget this. Ricky Nattiel scored a touchdown in the first play of the game in Super Bowl. What was it? Super Bowl 23, 22 or 23. The one they played against the Redskins.
Yeah,
people forget this. The Broncos had a 10-point lead at the end of the first quarter before the absolute just atrocity of a second quarter in that season.
That was Doug Williams, right?
That was the Doug Williams. Yeah, Timmy Smith and Doug Williams went off.
Doug Williams got off to a little bit of a slow start, right? Didn't he get beat up a little bit in the first quarter?
Yeah, he got his leg rolled up on.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was 10-0. Elway threw a bomb on the first play of the game for like a 56-yard. It was first play of the game for the Broncos. I think I don't know if the Redskins had a possession first, but it was the first play from scrimmage for the Broncos. Yeah. He went off and threw a great touchdown pass, the bomb to Ricky Nattiel, and got 10-0. And then they were also winning the previous year. They were up on the Giants 10-9 at halftime. Yeah. And Rich Carlos missed a field goal right before halftime that could have extended the lead by 4, and it wouldn't have mattered. And the Giants just steamrolled them in the second half. But so in 1988, the year that they won their first Super Bowl, their first Super Bowl was in 1997. The year they won their first Super Bowl, 1997, their leading receiver was Shannon Sharp, who had 72 catches for 1,100 yards, 3 touchdowns. Rod Smith was number 2 with 70 catches for 1,180. He had 12 touchdowns. Ed McCaffrey had 45 catches for 590 yards and 8 touchdowns. Now, the next year, in 1998, they had 2,000 receivers again, but it was actually Rod Smith led them in catches and yards with 86 for 1,200 yards. McCaffrey also went over 1,000. He had 64 catches for 1,053 yards, and then Shannon Sharp had 64 catches for 768. And McCaffrey and Shannon Sharp both had 10 touchdowns. So I've always said, the first time Elway was actually surrounded by elite talent other than just him, those teams were pretty flipping good. And Ed
McCaffrey is the head coach of Northern Colorado now?
I think he got let go.
Oh, did he let go?
I believe. Yeah, I don't think he's there anymore. But yeah, he was. He was also the head coach at Valor Christian for a minute, which was a school out there that was kind of like the Colorado version of IMG for a minute. So yeah, he got let go. Things didn't go great at Northern Colorado.
Well, he brought in the quarterback. What was the quarterback's name? Dylan, right? That was at Michigan originally.
Yeah,
he brought him
in.
Yeah.
They
weren't very well.
Yeah, they weren't very good. But yeah, Eddie Mack was good. I'll never forget, because I remember this till the day I die, Ryan. The night, because remember 9/11. Well, you may not remember. You're little. Well, you might remember because it was close to you. I'm sure you remember it. Yeah.
I remember 9/11.
But I remember watching the Broncos Giants on Monday Night Football the night before. 9/11 was on a Tuesday. Yeah, and I remember that was the game where Eddie McCaffrey's career got ended. He got his leg broken in that game. And I remember just, feeling terrible the next morning. And then, of course, the world forever changed, right? But no, him and Elway were a really good combination. Now, he had some big postseason catches, but here's the crazy thing. Ed McCaffrey will always be remembered his biggest play in a Broncos uniform was a block, or his most memorable play was a block. Do you remember that in the Super Bowl when he threw that little slide out to I think Howard Griffith, and Ed McCaffrey just lit Brian. It was Brian Williams, I think is who it was. I think just lit that dude up and then pointed at him on his way down. Have you ever seen that in the ESPN?
Yeah, Cowboy was a big dude,
thing?
man. Some people forget he's dude's like 6'5" and like,
and he was so paranoid. Like he'd take out like
dude.
all that he could of his pads so he could because he was paranoid about how slow he was. He wasn't that slow. But yeah, Rod Smith was the best receiver. Vance Johnson was my favorite of the three amigos when I was a kid because he had some flash to him, but none of those guys were great players. And like they had Clarence Kay and Orson Mobley at running back, tight end, Sammy Winder at running back. That 1 year of Bobby Humphrey, his rookie year was really good. And then after that, he never did anything again. But yeah, when he finally got Rod Smith to me is one of the most underrated receivers of all time. He was a tremendous, tremendous player.
I've never seen a wide receiver when he makes the reception turn up the field as quick as Rod Smith, man. Like he accelerated out of his breaks. Like it was nuts. Yeah.
And honestly, some of his best years were after Elway retired because Rod was a rookie in 95. They won the Super Bowl together. The first Super Bowl, Ryan, his first 1,000-yard season. That was only his third year. He had 1, 2, 3, 4. He had 6 more 1,000-yard receiving years after Elway retired, including 2 years he went over 100 catches in 2000 and 2001. And I would argue when you can put up those kind of numbers with Brian Greasy as your starting quarterback, you're a pretty darn good receiver. I'm sorry. He had Gus Frerotte and Brian Greasy throwing him passes. You're a pretty darn good receiver if that's the case. So,
do you remember when Gus Frerotte was on the Redskins and he headbutted the wall and knocked himself out? Remember that one? Yeah, that was great.
Drafted the same year as Heath Schuler in the 7th round, who to me was one of the, you always talk about how you meet really cool celebrities and famous people. And I remember meeting Brad Johnson. I was a camper at, I think it was Gus Parcell quarterback camp when I was in high school, and met Brad, really nice guy, just nicest guy I worked with. Met Heath Schuler there, one of the biggest jerks I ever met in my life. Yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Like I remember, I met Steven when I worked at Art Monk's football camp, met Steven Davis. Remember him? Really good dude.
Really good player.
Had me scared. I was thinking he was a jerk for a second. So I had these 8-year-olds, right? So what happened was the Redskins players were late getting there. And so all my 8-year-olds had, because I was like I was in college. I was just there working the camp. I wasn't coaching the camp. I was like, just there kind of helping out. And so we would kind of have our little groups of kids that we had to make sure got places. And I had 8-year-olds. Yeah. And so those 8-year-olds are at camp to meet the Redskin players, not to go to football camp. You know what I mean? So, but they had to go to camp. And so they were all crying because they couldn't get their football signed. So what I did was when we got them on the bus, I went back into the rooms. I got all their footballs, and I went and I was going to get the Redskin players to sign them. And I went up to Steven Davis, and he was messing with me. He's like, no, I'm not going to sign that. You're going to sell them all. He was totally joking. He was just giving me a hard time. And I was like, dude, like seriously? But he was great. He took all the football, signed them. Deion Sanders was there. He was really cool with the kids, and other Redskins. But remember June Cato June? Stole my football preseason magazine. Still mad about that, Cato. I want my magazine back. So he's like, hey, can I look at that? Sure. And then never saw Cato again.
You know what college Cato June went to?
Michigan. It's not surprised. Not surprised. But yeah, I'd go with Rod Smith. Was the best player that he ever signed. But yeah, he was really underrated player. Very underrated player. Liked him very much.
Steven Davis is a nice little shout too. I like Steven Davis a lot.
Yeah, but it was really that's nice. I mean, again, he was busting my chops, and then when you realize he's messing with me, it's funny, and you like him even more because he's having some fun, But really nice guy, and stayed there for like the Redskin players weren't supposed to be there that long, and he stayed like way past the time he was supposed to in order to sign all the autographs. And you know what else I thought was really cool? Art Monk, it was his camp. And most of these guys who it's their camp, they come and they show up. He literally stayed in the dorms and stayed there the entire week around the kids. And so you see that his name's on it, but you know how it is, Ryan, with these guys. A lot of times, especially back in the day. But he was there the entire time, hung with the kids the entire time. And he mainly focused on like really being around the younger kids.
That's cool.
Went way up in my respect book when I saw that. Because I just, you're using your name, your fame for good. And you're seeing more, something we don't hear a lot about this in the NFL, but that's one thing I've heard a lot more. You're seeing a lot more of these NFL players doing camps where they're actually like really there and
Yeah.
involved and trying to go back. And we don't hear enough about not let one of these guys get a DUI and we're going to hear all
Right.
about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't hear enough about that stuff, and they are doing a lot of good in their communities. And, I wish that we would focus on that more, but you're seeing that a lot more now. Of course they're making money, but I don't care.
Sure.
Make money. You're making an impact in these kids' lives. They're going to have this memory of, I guarantee those little I was moved by it and I was a teenager. I guarantee those little 8-year-olds were completely moved by the fact that these NFL players spent time with them,
100%.
So if you're making money off of it, good for you. But
They
you're making an
analyze that
impact in
stuff.
people's lives. And I love that
Yeah.
stuff. And I wish that we would do more as a media to lift those stories up more than we do some of the craziness like about John Morant and all this other nonsense that we always love to focus on and talk about. Because there's a lot.
Oh,
I had a buddy
John.
who played in the NFL and he said, look, 95% of the players in the NFL are just normal guys that love football.
Yeah.
And we go home to our wives and our kids. He says, but all they ever want to talk about, he's like, is the 5% of the guys that act like idiots. That's all they ever want to talk about. And so there's this perception of we're all just these guys going to clay. Because most of the guys didn't do all that stuff. Now, maybe it's different now. This is, he's my age. But he's like, they'd always talk about this stuff. He played for the Chargers about how there's all these. He's like, he hated Any Given Sunday. He's like, dude, that is not at all. He's like, are there guys on our team that were like that? Yeah, but he'd be like 5 dudes doing those things. Like most of us were home with our kids, and they made it seem like the whole team is at this party just snorting coke off hookers and stuff. It was crazy. He's like, that's not how the NFL is. Some upper echelon guys and some teams like the Cowboys had some craziness going on. But even then, those were just some of the stars. Most of the guys for the Cowboys were just dudes that just went home to their kids after practice was over. But that's not the way it's portrayed because that's not as interesting and doesn't sell as many stories and clicks and all that other crap.
I didn't really like Any Given Sunday. I really liked the speech, but other than that, I'm not.
I liked the football action because the point that I made to people was that's about as realistic as you're going to get. The crazy hectic of the way it is. Like if you want to have what's the most accurate portrayal of what's like actually being on the field, that was it. Because it is football is crazy when you're down there, man. But the rest of the movie I thought sucked. I mean, they took every negative stereotype about sports and put it into one movie, made it seem like that's the norm.
Yeah, they did.
I hated it. I really hated it. It was lazy. You know what I mean? Like it just was easy. Yep. It's easy.
It's clicks.
Anyway, the movie version of it. Yes, you're correct. Yes. A lot of people love that movie though, Ryan. I'm gonna keep teasing you with this question. A lot of people love that movie. I did not like it at all. I
wasn't a fan of it. Was not a fan of it myself.
I'm going to bring it up again, and I promise you this time I'm not taking it away. So you've already probably got Wade's question memorized by now.
I didn't even read it yet. Wade Garrett with the super chat. Thanks so much, Wade. I know kids from the 2024-25 class are used to help recruit other kids. Do current kids on the team also help recruit kids or alumni? Do they show up to camps to help talk to recruits?
Absolutely. When Coach Heastan was here, for example, I think there was one year. It was like Martin, Stanley, McGlinchey, Q. I think last summer, I think they all came back and worked the camp. Hainsey, they all came back and worked the camp with Coach Eastan. You'll see that stuff a lot. Yeah. Now they don't do camps as much. Like you'll have a guy come and speak, but like Jerome Bettis was around a lot for different events. Tim Brown will be around for certain things. So they'll use those guys. But the problem for Notre Dame guys is because they're a national brand, they don't stay around. So it's hard to and this isn't a shot at Ohio State, but like a lot of kids that went to Ohio State were from Ohio. So when they're done with their careers, they stay in Ohio. It's a lot easier for them to get in a car and it's not a shot at them. It's just they just happen to live there. Well, Notre Dame's recruiting kids from Texas and California, and they're not staying in South Bend, Indiana. Right. Like Tony Rice is one of the few that actually stayed around here. The only reason Reggie Brooks was around here is because he worked at Notre Dame. Now he's in Texas now, right? So it's just a little harder to get him back for all these different things. But yeah, you also saw them stay away during the Kelly era, partly because they weren't invited as much, and partly because a lot of them just didn't like Brian Kelly. But that's been something the alums I'm talking about. But the current players, absolutely, they help recruit kids. And the best way they can do it is just by being honest. And that's the thing. Recruits care about that. Be honest.
Yep.
So, yeah. Interesting. Good question.
The next super chat, Tyler Evans. Thank you, Tyler. With San Diego State staying in the Mountain West, what does that say about the Pac-12 conference, and will it disappear?
I'd have to hear more about that, Tyler, because the only thing I've seen, Ryan, is that they basically, because of how long the Pac-12 negotiations are taking, they decided to go back to the Mountain West. It's about all that I've really seen. So I don't know enough about it. Maybe, Ryan, you can add more. I'd have to know more about the specifics of it, Tyler, and also, perhaps it was the Pac-12 that said, "Hey, thanks, but no thanks." Because maybe the deal they're getting isn't quite what they hoped, and it just is better to spread it around between 10 teams. Will the Pac-12 disappear? I think so, but they'll do what they've always done. They'll go to the Pac-10. I think that's their best chance of survival, is to be smaller and then pay your teams more in that league, and then hope that you can convince the remaining teams to stay. I just don't know if there's enough passion for football and college sports on the West Coast, outside of what, like Oregon. Arizona tends to have pretty good fans when they're good. Like Cal doesn't have much of a fan base. Stanford doesn't have much of a fan base. It's just, once you lost to LA teams, Ryan, it's hard for me to imagine them surviving. It really is. And the Big 12 has a pretty good TV deal that might allow them to maybe go poach them. But that's the other thing. The Big 12 just re-upped their deal. So are they going to have to renegotiate if they add more? There's so much in play here. It's hard to keep up with it a lot of the time. It really is.
It is. It's kind of a shame, too, because it's kind of stealing the headlines away from the fact that the Pac-12 is going to be a really interesting and, I think, very competitive conference in 2023. I mean, you talk about Oregon and USC and Washington State and UCLA and one of the Arizona teams maybe taking a step forward. Like, I think the Pac-12 is actually going to be a really sneaky good conference in 2023.
Very
all
deep.
we're talking about is alignments,
because even if you take out the two teams that are leaving, Oregon's got a shot to contend for that title this year. Washington does. Utah's the two-time reigning Pac-12, back-to-back Pac-12 champs.
Yep.
Really like what Oregon State's doing. You've mentioned Washington State as a sleeper team. I think when we did it, was it you that said last week when we were doing like sleeper teams? I thought so.
Yeah.
In the mailbag. And I like what they're doing there. Arizona State. I mean, look, I think Kenny Dillingham got hired a year too early to be a head coach, but he's a pretty good offensive mind. I wasn't a huge fan of him at Memphis, but he's sold me. He's done a really nice job. I think Judd Fish has done a really nice job at Arizona. They're going to be better this year. So there's going to be some competitiveness in that league, even outside of the two teams that are leaving, right? I mean, I could see a lot of upsets, and it's almost like they hurt themselves because of how deep they are, because it pretty much it's going to make it really hard for any of those teams to get to the playoff, because they annihilate each other, right? Like they just beat each other. USC could go out and beat Washington and Oregon. I can't even remember if they play those teams, and then in Utah, and then go get beat by Washington State or Oregon State. I mean, that's just the way that the league is, and it's a fun league to watch. I mean, I know, but I don't stay up that late to watch. This year you should, because there's going to be some really good games at 10 o'clock this year on the Pac-12, because there's some quality football teams in that league, and it's going to be a fun league to watch. And you know what's been a big part of it, Ryan? They've upgraded the coaching in a big way the last couple of years. I mean, you went from Clay Helton to Lincoln Riley. You went from whoever was at UCLA, Jim Moore, Carl Dorrell to Brian Kelly. Chip Kelly. Jonathan Smith has been a great hire as alma mater. Kalen DeBoer's turned out to be, at least so far, a really strong hire. Dan Lanning I still don't know what kind of coach Dan Lanning is. Guy's recruiting his butt off. There's no doubt about that. Judd Fish is doing a really nice job there. Definitely an upgrade over Mike Price and all, or was it Mike Stoops and some of those other guys they've hired in recent years. So the coaching is certainly upgraded, and even the guy at Cal, Ryan, he's a good football coach. He's just stuck in a place that just doesn't give a rip about football right now.
Yeah.
I losing David Shaw stung, but from what I've learned about Troy Taylor so far, that's a good hire. Troy Taylor, right? I get that.
Troy Taylor. Yep.
Yeah. I like the hire so far. I mean, like, he's recruiting. They're putting a really sneaky good recruiting class together. They've already got 27. Think about this. Stanford already has 27 commitments.
It's wild.
And there's some quality players in there. So I think the coaching is upgraded. It just nobody talks about it because ESPN says like, well, nobody talks about the Pac-12. Whose fault is that? Yours.
Yeah.
Like you're the ones that need to talk about it more. Like you're the big dog. But I agree with you, Ryan. It's going to be a fun league this year. I think the Big 12 was that league for a long time. I'm not as sold on the Big 12 depth-wise this year as the Pac-12 is like the new Big 12, where there's like 6 or 7 or 8 teams that just could beat any other team in that league on any given Saturday, and I enjoy that. That to me is what I want to see. I don't want to see 2-3 teams just dominating the league. I want to see where every game matters because, man, you just survived that gauntlet against USC, Washington, and Oregon, and then you get tripped up by Oregon State or Washington State or Arizona. That's good football right there, Ryan. And
agree.
I'm going to be paying attention. That's for darn sure.
No doubt.
That's for darn sure.
We'll be paying attention to ESPN moving forward, but
no. Well, except watching the games. That's for darn sure.
From Ethan Rao, is how you pronounce that? Rao?
I just say Rao. I'm not sure if that's correct or not.
Ethan, if that is incorrect, if you could just throw it in the chat, I would appreciate it. Love the show, guys, and always enjoy the fact you don't overreact and get too emotional about things when something unfortunate happens in recruiting. I mean, I would get burnt out if I overreacted some of the chat does, right? Like I would absolutely get, because Ethan, I think the tough part is, and this is honesty, is that I am a fan of Notre Dame, right? So when something doesn't go right, it stings, right? It does. But if every time something negative happens, it just like killed me. If I lost sleep every single night and couldn't get myself to sleep, like I would be burnt out of this job at this point.
It's a double-edged sword, right, Ryan, for us, because the passion for it is why you're here. It's why in the middle of a day, 2 hours and 20 minutes into a show, we're still around 600 people in the show. Right. And I love that. I do. I love the passion. It's just sometimes it's like we need to take a deep breath and realize like that reaction is not healthy for you. Yes. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you can't. I was pissed when I, when you even, and I knew that if he committed right now, he wasn't picking Notre Dame, and I was still pissed about it. But, I just, it drives me nuts too, because some people, it's like, no matter how much you prove their point of view wrong, no matter how much you prove the flaw of ranking systems, they refuse to get off it. And I don't know why. It gives them solace being able to find. It's like some people, I just feel like you're not happy unless you're miserable. There are some people like that. It's like, dude, you never talk. You're never in the chat like talking about how you're happy about something. Notre Dame gets a commitment, and you're complaining about what they didn't get, or what's next, and that kind of thing. And it's like, can you just let me for like 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, let me enjoy this one for 5 minutes, and then we can talk about something else. And
Brian, it was like the Tabron Benny Powell thing, right? Like everyone's freaking out. I'm just like, guys, we just got Logan Thomas and Nate Roberts and just are about to get Bronte Johnson, right? Like, I understand you don't like this one recruitment, but like there were 3 other really good ones around.
And it's okay to not be happy about this one. It's okay. Yeah. It's the jumping off the cliff when something bad happens. It's like, oh, this didn't happen. Well, fire this guy and fire that guy, and this guy sucks, and the whole class sucks, and it's no different than Brian Kelly, when in reality, it's so easy for me to disprove that. It's just like, but yet, I guarantee you, the main guy that I was going at on that response, I promise you, didn't make a dent. Didn't make a single dent. Won't change his opinion at all. I threw a bunch of numbers and facts out there. Won't change his opinion at all. Not even a bit. That's probably the most frustrating thing, to be completely honest with you, is that right there. But it is what it is. At the end of the day, Ryan, the results on the field are going to be what matter. And if those don't get better, then that point of view is supported. They've got to go out and start putting a better product in the field. It really is as simple as that. It really is. They got to do a better job. They do.
From Patty O'Furniture.
Hey, can I just say how much I love that name? That's freaking hilarious. I absolutely love that name, by the way.
Patio Furniture says, how does not allowing recruits to sign letter of intent until December protect players? It would seem to help only the top prospects while screwing over the dominoes lined up behind them.
Oh, it's getting worse. Have you seen the new thing now where basically if you sign a letter of intent, it's really not even binding anymore? Did you see that rule this past last week? That's not for the players, folks. Patty, and you're correct. These things that the NCAA say is for the players. Who Who from the players is arguing for that? Who's the representation at the board meeting for the players arguing for that? There's very little.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is this is what the coaches want. The coaches want to be able to easier poach players from other schools. They don't want an early signing period because then they won't be able to steal those players from other teams. It doesn't even matter now, though, that NILs basically mean nothing. But it's not about like if a player just wants his recruitment to be over, it's almost impossible for him to do so. And that's just the reality because at the end of the day, the NCAA does not give a rip. I mean, have we not already established this? The NCAA does not care about student athletes, right? We all understand that, right? Are we all on the same page on that now? They don't.
I agree. Yeah.
The NCAA cares about making money. And the players don't matter because the players are cycled through. Like that's the reality. The players come and go. The coaches and the administrators and the people, those are the people that they listen to. Shouldn't, because those people clearly have shown they have no ability to understand how to run this business. It's all going to be self-serving. Like, is Nick Saban really going to get on there and say, hey, like I'm going to make these rules that are going to benefit everyone else and hurt us? No, he's not. Now, I actually think Nick Saban's one of the few coaches that has actually been the most honest that this is bad for the game. And he even warned people, hey, if you guys don't change this, I'm going to take advantage of it. Right? That's what's been impressive about Nick Saban. I mean, in some regard, I think there's a little bit of disingenuousness to it, right? Because he's always been buying players. It's just, now everyone else can buy players. So I think even then, but his warnings have been legitimate. This is not good for the game. But most of these coaches that say stuff like that, it's for themselves. It's really about what's best for them. There's like nobody looking out for the players right now. That's the saddest thing. But at the end of the day, the players would end up making the same decisions. Look at the NFL. The NFL players agreed to a 17-game schedule. Like everything that's going on right now from a schedule standpoint, for the most part, is something players have agreed to. Because why do they agree to it? More games means what? More money.
More money. Yes. More money.
That's it. But there's nobody looking out for the players. And the NCAA doesn't make decisions based on what's best for the players. They don't. Here's a perfect example. Targeting. Well, that's a rule that's a rule that protects them from a liability standpoint because they saw all the lawsuits that were happening to the NFL about concussions and CTE and all that. That was like, this is a proactive move to protect them from liability. That's exactly what hey, we had rules in place to not allow this kind of thing. It's not about looking out for the players. Let's be real about that. So why would this kind of rule be for players? So Patty, you're correct. It has nothing to do with protecting players. Nothing at all.
Well, and then NCAA passes the NIL stuff, but then doesn't.
Right.
They don't do anything with it. They don't restrict anything. It's just,
they don't give any guidance to the players. There's no I mean, you almost penalize schools for at first, like schools could not be involved with their players. So you're just throwing them to the wolves. These professional. Hustlers, these lawyers. And I mean, are there some lawyers out there looking out for these kids? Yeah, there are. There's always good people in every profession, but you just threw them to the wolves. And you're asking these, like my parents would not have been able to, when I was that age, would not have been able to immediately tell the difference between a person that's actually trying to help me and a person who's trying to help themselves. I mean, that's what makes those people good at what they do.
Yep. And
they just threw them to the wolves, man. Just because they're cowards. So no, they don't care about kids. They've never really cared about kids, if we're being honest about it. It may be very early on, but I should say once TV got into the thing and the money became huge, that's when they really stopped caring. And that's what's true with most things. Once money becomes a dominant factor, like news, like growing up, I always thought there was a certain bias in news, but I felt like they were at least trying to somewhat report news accurately. They just kind of came at it from their own point of view. Now it's just we're going to say things that sensationalize, and because that's what our people that are giving us money care about. Or we're not going to talk about this because our donors are this, right? Like, I'm watching news shows and they're saying something about a certain product, and then it's like brought to you by Pfizer. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I'm sure that previous segment you guys just did was fully unbiased and all completely right. Sure, I'm sure. Because the people that provided that are your sponsors. I'm sure. And that's what sucks about so much of this, Ryan, is money has completely, in some ways, made the game greater, but in other ways has really destroyed it. And that's, that's a sad thing. But the NCAA sucks. It really does.
Yes, it does.
I can't stand it. Okay. Adam Ladd says, so does DC has to visit every defensive recruit, every big time recruit? Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Especially 90 minutes away.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Every big time 5-star recruit. Yes. The defensive coordinator should absolutely go visit that guy. Go look at where Jared Parker was flying to this spring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. They should absolutely do that.
We had a question from Michael Collins, who says, what position is Josiah Kia expected to play? Or sorry, he's talking about Kahana Kia, his older brother, expected to play when he returns, and how does it impact positional recruiting in future classes, if at all? Thank you.
So he's supposed to be back in 2024, right?
Correct. Yep.
So so this is also partly why if you miss on the 2 linebackers that they're supposed to get back, I wouldn't necessarily just go take a guy. If they get Kingston, thrilled. If they get Bradley Shaw, thrilled. But if they don't, it's just like, look, you've got 3 kids last year. You got the 2 kids in this class. You're getting Kahanu back. Just go with it, and just move on to next year and try to hit a home run next year. That's what I would do. But I would imagine Mike, because that's what he was playing when he left. The only thing is, Ryan, we don't know what his body's going to look like when he gets back. Now, I know he's been in North Carolina, but I don't know. It's the unknown. He could come back 240 pounds and be ready to rock and roll. I have no idea.
Yeah.
But so we'll honestly don't know. But Mike would be most likely where he's projected to play.
Players usually move in, right? You don't usually see Mike's move out like to Will or to Rover or anything. That's not usually a transition that happens.
And when it is, it's because there's a need somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Not the other way around.
We had a question from Tim B, who says, can you explain the on-field production draft pick history angle of recruiting for Notre Dame? I feel that they need to get it done on the field and in the draft to close the gap. Agree or disagree? Talked about that a lot.
I mean, absolutely. Because look, here's the thing. There was somebody on the message board yesterday, and it was actually a really well thought out, well argued point of view. I just strongly disagree with it. And the notion was that Notre Dame needs to stop having the 4 for 40 be the number 1 selling point, that it should be number 3, and that the NFL and other stuff needs to be 1 and 2. And I said, here's where I think that's misguided. Whether you prioritize your on-field success number 1 or number 2, it doesn't matter if it doesn't equal what your competition is doing. Right. And so to me, the one thing that makes Notre Dame unique is the 4 for 40, the 4 for forever pitch, right? It's the academic. It's what we can do for you beyond the field. That's the best thing you have going for you. That's your separator. That's the only reason you're even in the game with some of these kids, right? Well, we end up not getting a kid. Yes, but you wouldn't have been in the game if it wasn't for that. So why are you even in the game? Well, it's because number 1, number 2, and number 3 aren't there. So to me, Ryan, the 4 for 40, the academic piece always needs to be number 1. What you need to do, however, is you need to make sure number 2 and 3 is better. And that's exactly what Marcus Freeman said to Chris Zorich. He said it to us when he was the defensive coordinator. He's like, look, kids want 3 things. They want to know that they can get a great education. Most kids. They want to know they can get a great education. They want to play for a championship, and they want to go to the NFL. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Because if you were a top business major and you were being recruited by Notre Dame's business school and Harvard and all this other kind of stuff, wouldn't you care about who gives me the best chance to find success in my chosen field? Of course you would. It's no different for athletes. And so when you look at a Keon Keeley and Keon makes this choice, now again, I don't agree with Keon's choice, but I understand why he made it. It's okay, your product number 2 and 3 are not good enough to compete with Bama, no matter what you do. So why would you then sacrifice the one thing that you have over Alabama in hopes that maybe this kid will care enough about it or a parent will care enough about it to where we can win this one? Because, Ryan, you and I have seen a lot of battles where Notre Dame got a kid recently, the 23 class, that was a highly ranked recruit. Perfect example, Braylon James. If you'd have tried to sell something other than the academic piece for Braylon James, guess what, folks? He's at Stanford.
Yes. Yeah.
So you have to keep what you have best to be your number 1 sales pitch. Do you think they got Jaden Greathouse because of their past production or champion? No, it's because they sold the other stuff. Now the key is do a good enough job coaching to where you make a better on-field product and then start developing these players. Get more Isaiah Foskey's and turn them into 1st and 2nd round picks. That's what you need to do, right?
Right.
Get Joe Waltz and turn him into first-round picks. Get Benjamin Morris and turn him into first-round picks. Then it makes it easier to recruit the big-time players moving forward because 2 and 3 have caught up to number 1.
And can I also say, Brian, I again, we're going too far one way or the other, because now people are like, no kid cares about the 440. That's not correct. You're not right about that.
Like to say it's not even close to me. And we're Ryan, you're talking about top 100 kids too. We're not talking about 3 stars. We're talking about top 100 kids. Jeremiah Love is at Notre Dame for one reason and one reason only.
Academics.
One reason only.
Yeah.
Because of Notre Dame's academic situation. That's it, folks. 100% the reason. And you know who says that? Jeremiah's dad, and every coach that recruited him, right?
Yes.
Braylon James, top 100 recruit, is at Notre Dame for one reason and one reason only, the academic piece.
Yep.
So to sit there and say kids don't care about that, that's your own prejudice in this. And I'm not talking prejudice from a racial standpoint. I'm talking about prejudice from a thinking kids only care about what you care about or what you think the media has told you that these kids care about.
Listen to my interview with Justin Thurman earlier in the show and tell me that kid doesn't care about academics and the 4 for 40. Please tell me that.
Might he make another decision down the road because Notre Dame's not good enough from a football standpoint? Of course he might. But it doesn't mean that doesn't matter to him. Are you going to tell me that Myron Rolle did not care about academics when he chose Florida? No. He also wanted to be an NFL football player. He knew and believed in himself that I can achieve these academic goals. The guy was a Rhodes Scholar. Isn't he like a brain surgeon now? Something like that. Yeah. He played at Florida State.
Yeah.
So he didn't care about but what he was smart enough to realize that this school may give me 1, but this school over here can give me 2, and I am going to make sure that 3 is correct. So to say that kids now, are there some kids that don't care? Absolutely, guys. That's always been true. That was true when Notre Dame had 4 straight number 1 ranked recruiting classes. There were still kids that were not going to give Notre Dame the time of day, despite the fact Notre Dame had won a championship, was beating Miami, and was landing number 1 classes. There were still kids that were not going to give Notre Dame time of day because they either wanted money or they didn't want to go to class. It's always been true. But there's way more kids than people think that care about academics. If Notre Dame's football resume was the same as Alabama's, 100% guarantee you Keon Keeley's at Notre Dame right now. I guarantee you. But it's not close. And that's the difference. Get that better, and then it makes it easier to do the other thing. I promise you that's true. And I know that because I've been doing this for over a decade, and Ryan's only been doing this for 2 years, and he's learned that easily because of a conversation with kids. And we have seen a lot of kids pick Notre Dame for the 4 for 40, and we're not talking about the 3 stars. We're not talking about the kid that they flipped late and they beat Adi Tagumba Ogundiji, a kid they beat Western Michigan. It's not who we're talking about. We're talking about Jeremiah Love. We're talking about Braylon James. We're talking about Charles Jagasaw. We're talking about Brennan Vernon. We're talking about Drake Bowen.
Yeah.
We're talking about Jaden Ausberry. You're going to tell me that Notre Dame's 4 for 40 wasn't a huge reason why Jaden Ausberry picked Notre Dame? It absolutely was. You're going to tell me it wasn't a huge reason why Christian Gray picked Notre Dame? Why do you all think Micah Bell, whose brother plays at Georgia, came to Notre Dame? Why do you think Micah Bell told Georgia thanks but no thanks when Georgia came calling?
Georgia tried to flip him.
Yes. Yeah, right, why did he say no? Why did he say no? Because he's a great student with offers from Ivy League schools. That's why. So again, we can point to reality without just going off on the deep end of saying that this also is not true, because I don't know why it's so hard for us to just actually discuss facts and say that's not good enough, that has to get better, without then going off on the far opposite end. It's like that's where we are now, whether it's politics, whether it's culture, whether it's sports now. It's like there's no one having a rational conversation. It's either I'm throwing bombs from this edge or I'm throwing bombs from that edge. And that's why we can't have conversations anymore, because when one thing happens, we get in our feelings and we just go skyrocketing in that direction of negativity or whatever the case may be, overly positive, because I can't allow the negativity to subscribe, and we can't have grown-up conversations. It drives me nuts, but we're going to have grown-up conversations, and that's just the reality of it. And if you don't like it, there's plenty of other shows that you can go watch. There are. I'm good.
We had a super chat from Eric Crawford. Eric, thank you so much. Tuning in late. Thanks for hosting a show holiday weekend. 10-year-old son Evan asks, did you see signs of defense playing faster in spring with more time under Al Golden?
Yes, but it's hard to really know for sure because it was like it was part of blitz packages and practices, and you're going to look a little bit faster. But I'll say this: the timing looked way better this spring. Players were playing with a little bit more of a pep in their step this spring. End of the day, though, Eric, we need to see it in the fall. But part of the optimism I do have, and Ryan, you and I have talked about this off air, but part of my optimism is coming from what I saw in the spring. It's
Right.
not just wishful thinking. Gee, I hope. It's like, you know what? Like JD looked pretty good in the spring. Jack Kaiser looked pretty good in the spring. Xavier Watts looked pretty good in the spring. Riley Mills looked pretty darn good in the spring, right? I mean, Javante Jean-Baptiste showed me some stuff in the spring. It's coming from what we saw, but you have to temper that because it's still the spring, right? But yes, Eric, I do think that there was that we did see that. We did see some of that. I'm sorry, Ryan. I have to pull this. This is not a this is just right in the middle of all these people losing their minds. This question from Robbie Sevier, or this comment: just ate a giant burrito, feel better already. I love it. Love it.
Yes.
Perspective, my friend. Absolutely love it. Here we go. We got some super chats down here.
Wicked Bronco Productions says, what's your read on Notre Dame after the Scott decision? Do they plan on keeping on him? Is he still coming for the Ohio State game? Any backup plans for defensive line? Updates on wide receiver? I thought Mama Scott wanted Notre Dame.
Mama Scott wanted him to stay in the North.
Yeah.
I think she likes Marcus Freeman a ton. She likes Chad Bowden a ton. She was going to let Justin make his own decision, even if that meant going far away from home. But the only time I've ever heard of Mrs. I don't know if I think it's Mrs. Scott. Only time I've ever heard of her putting her foot down, not even putting her foot down, but she really wanted him to stay in the North. I don't think she necessarily would have been upset whether it's Michigan or Ohio State or Notre Dame. She would have been perfectly fine with coming to Notre Dame. But no, I don't think she was necessarily pushing him to Notre Dame by any stretch. Now, to the first part of your question, Ryan, I would absolutely stay on him. And I would absolutely bring him in for the Ohio State game. Because if they beat you, so what? He's going to go to Ohio State. But if you beat them, maybe you have a shot to go out there. And because here's the ultimate scenario. If you don't keep recruiting him, I promise you, you're not going to flip him, right? I mean, that's obvious. Let's say Justin, come to the Ohio State game just to only, if for anything else, to watch the team that you're going to play against us. You go in that game, Al Washington's D-line outplays Ohio State's D-line. Notre Dame wins the game. You still may not be able to flip him. But at least now you've got something to sell to him. And maybe he'll listen. Maybe he won't. I don't know the answer. But we'll have to find out. All right, next super chat here from Wicked Bronco Productions. He says, seems like Scott committed based off visit highs, goes from a Notre Dame lean, Miami lean, Georgia lean, Michigan lean, Ohio State. I don't think it's over, especially if we blow out Ohio State, make him realize he messed up. Look, I think there's something to that, Ryan. I do. He's had a very emotional recruitment, right? I would agree in that regard.
I would agree with that part. I would say this, though, Wicked Bronco Productions, we talked about this earlier in the show. I would feel a whole lot better about potentially flipping him, though, if he picked a Southern school and not a Northern school. Like, I just think it's going to be a much harder pull to be able to now outduel a committed Justin Scott to Ohio State than if it was Georgia or Miami. Like, that's just kind of where I am at. I think it's going to be a tough one.
Very much so. And Ryan, we said that last week. If the best thing for Notre Dame would have been if he stayed uncommitted or committed to a Southern school. It's no different than we thought it was Michigan, right? That's what we said. Like, it's going to be tough to flip him from Michigan. It's going to be even harder to flip him from Ohio State, guys.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, especially because Notre Dame was probably third in the pecking order. Well, third in the pecking order of Northern schools. So, like, yeah.
Right. I mean, and I would argue he liked Miami more. It's just he wasn't willing to go far away from home.
Exactly.
So they just faded further and further and further down the list with that kid. It was really not good.
That's it. Kevin Horton with the super chat says, guys, what was our last consensus 5-star recruit on the interior line? Aaron Lynch, ? What was our last first-round draft pick?
Last first-round draft pick was 2019 with Jerry Tillery.
Yeah.
Last consensus interior, I mean, Aaron Lynch was not a 5-star, and he was not an interior player.
Yeah, he was an edge.
So I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I know Sheldon Day was a 5-star by one service. I think Scout had him as a 5-star. Consensus, no clue.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But I don't care because you know who else was not a consensus 5-star recruit? Quentin Nelson, Michael Mayer, right? Joe Walt. I really don't care.
Or the last interior defensive lineman to go in the first round, Jerry Tillery. So
he's a freaking offensive lineman. He was ranked as an offensive lineman by half the recruiting services, graded him as an offensive lineman. So, yeah, I mean, Notre Dame had a second-round draft pick at tight end named Troy Nicholas that most of the recruiting services ranked as an offensive lineman.
Right.
So I just don't care. But to Kevin's bigger point, though, Ryan, they do need to upgrade the talent of the interior of the defensive line. They've done a better job of it. I mean, there's some talent there. There's some Gabriel Rubio was a top 100 recruit, right? Riley Mills was a top 150 guy. But Jason Onye was a guy with a lot of ceiling. Tyson Ford was a top 100 guy. There's some guys there. They just have to continue to upgrade the quality and the consistency in which they bring in that kind of talent. That's certainly a need for an upgrade there. Absolutely. Absolutely.
No doubt.
So I'll go with you on that one.
We had another super chat from Ricky Bronco Productions. Thank you so much. I'm starting to think Notre Dame should bring back a guy like Manti Te'o or Stephon Tuitt to be a grad assistant and move up to linebacker or defensive line coach. 2 NFL guys who I could see help Notre Dame recruiting a lot. Kids love coaches who played in the NFL.
It'd be great. I don't think either of them have any interest in doing it. I mean, Manti's already said that's not really what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Look, there's a reason why. Now, Notre Dame has their fair share of guys that are coaching. Anthony Weaver's coaching. Like, there's some Notre Dame guys that are coaching, but there's a reason why a lot of Notre Dame graduates don't get into coaching. And this isn't me just like getting on my Notre Dame high horse because I'm not a Notre Dame grad. But the fact of the matter is Notre Dame players, to get into coaching more often than not, have to take pay cuts. That's just the reality. Todd Light took a pay cut to coach.
Yeah.
Simple as that. I mean, that's just the reality.
That's really wild. Yeah.
So, and again, coaches make 6 figures, folks. I mean, so Todd Light's one of those guys that probably made as much money, if not more, after his football career than he did during, because he used the money he made during and then his Notre Dame education to turn that into a lot more money. And that's part of the reason you go to Notre Dame. So, but Todd Light went to Notre Dame and played during a period of time where they were putting a bunch of dudes into the first round of the NFL. So it certainly helps. Okay, let's get to some more here, Ryan. We're kind of getting close to the end here. Let's get to a few of these here. This is a good one from John A1.
John says, which had more impact on Marcus Freeman, being Notre Dame head coach requirements of field or 8-4 or 9-4 overall disappointing season, and the momentum it took from the national image than it was when he was a defensive coordinator? Sorry, I'm rereading that question in my mind real quick.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of it, right? I mean, I think that the off the field requirements is, I think, where he was going with that, because it came up after we were talking about, like, so I think it's that. I don't think the 9-4 has necessarily, because like it's not affecting the 2025 class that much.
Not right
it's
now.
Had more so on the 2024 class, and it matters, right? But I think it's a combination of both of those things, because I think the off the field stuff is also partly led into some of the learning process that Coach Freeman had with being 9-4. And so I think it all kind of goes together to me, to be honest with you. But I think if I had to point to the two, I would argue that the 9-4 probably had a bigger impact, because if Coach Freeman had to learn his lessons about, his role, but Notre Dame's coming off of a 12-1 season where they went undefeated. Let's say Notre Dame beats Ohio State, beats Marshall, Stanford, USC. They go 12-0. They go to the playoff and they lose to Georgia the same exact way Ohio State does. Even with all the issues with Al Golden and Al Washington and Chris O'Leary and Coach Freeman, they're recruiting a little better than they are, at least defensively. I don't know how much better they can get with offensive recruiting right now, but defensive recruiting, maybe they never would have got Isaiah Canyon, they would have got Ryan Wingo early. I mean, but other than that, I can't think of, like, I don't know if I'll just say this, Ryan. I've looked at most of the top backs in the country, and I've looked at like Taylor Tatum's and these guys, and I'm like, I would not trade that guy for Keidron Young. Wouldn't. And so I'm good there. I don't know how much better can get there. I don't know how much better the offensive line recruiting could be based on who you wanted. Right. Like Brandon Baker's not coming to Notre Dame whether they won a national title, because they still aren't offering the one thing that's going to really matter in Brandon Baker's recruitment. Right. If y'all are catching my drift on that one. You get Gearby Lambert and Peter Jones and Styles Prescott and Anthony Knapp in this offensive line year nationally. I don't know how much better it could have gotten than that, Ryan. So, but defensively, I think it would have moved the needle with a lot of guys. I do. So I would say the on-field product. What's your thoughts on that, Ryan?
No, I think it's definitely the on-field product for me. I mean, that's John, I think especially because I think it's affected the 24 class because it's like more the immediacy, right? Like it's kind of how I feel. Like these guys are going to get Because the way I think of it, Brian, is you now have one season until the 2024 kids get there, right? So now it's a little bit of a smaller window of like, are they going to take a massive step forward or not? The 2025 kids, I think you're projecting out still a little bit further, right? Where you're still talking about future success. You're still talking about what Marcus Freeman's long-term vision is for the program. There's still a little bit more time to be able to get to those marks. So I think but I think it's always the on-field for me, John, like it always is. I think you hit that one, Brian, very well in that regard.
Thank you.
Welcome. James O'Reilly. I have heard a lot about the depth of the 2025 class on the defensive side of the ball. How is it looking on the offensive side, particularly the offensive line? Happy 4th. Offensive tackle class is bonkers in 2025, man. It's very good.
I mean, Ryan, I think you and I would agree that if Notre Dame simply signed an offensive line class from kids that visited this spring, they're going to have a heck of an offensive line class, right?
Yes.
I mean, because you're talking about Owen Strebig, who's a dude.
Yep.
You're talking about Rowan Byrne, who isn't ranked real high right now, but I love that kid's film. I mean,
he's starting to get ranked a little higher in some spots.
Okay,
he's like 100 something by one, I think.
He's really good. If you got Avery Gack, Josh Petty, and Matty Augustine, if you got 4 of that 5, and those are just kids that have visited already, that's one heck of an O-line class. Receiver, again, if they just got kids that have visited already, so let's say Dalen McCutcheon, number 1, Taylon Perry. That's my number 1 guy.
Taylor.
You got Taylon Perry.
Taylor.
Sorry, Cooper Perry. Dalen McCutcheon, Derek Meadows, Quincy Porter. All those guys have visited so far. If you got a 3-man class from that group of 5 and then added Jerome Bettis Jr. in there, that's a heck of a receiver class. I could say the same thing about tight end, same thing about running back, and same thing about quarterback. I mean, so things are trending in the right direction. This just comes down, James, to it's closing time, right? Like they've only got 1 offensive commit so far. So things are going in a good direction. It's just now they got to close on some of these guys and not panic. Like the thing that you can't do is because 24 momentum is not going well, like feel the need to panic and rush to, well, let's get some 25 kids in the class really quick to get some momentum. No, don't do that. Don't do that. Stay on course. Stay on course because I think things are going very well. The 25, from what I can tell, Ryan, so far is a really good class. The one position I haven't been in love with the depth so far, I don't love the running back class so far, but it's still young. They're still sophomores, so there's some good players, but I don't know that I think it's as deep as some of the other positions in the class at this point in time. And receiver is another one. It's really deep at receiver. I don't know if there's a lot of the 2008 class had like Julio Jones, AJ Green, Michael Floyd, Jonathan Baldwin, Dan Buckner. I mean, it was loaded with 5-star players. I don't know if I've seen that from the 2025 class, but it's super deep with really good players. I think probably Ryan Williams and Taylon Taylor are the 2 best I've seen so far. Now, again, there's a lot of kids I haven't seen yet.
Ryan Williams is really good.
Yeah, he's very good.
He's very good.
But we saw him watching KJ Lacey because they're high school teammates. So a lot of those balls KJ Lacey's throwing are to Ryan Williams, and they both make each other a lot better because they're both really good. Really good. So, Ryan, I mean, you agree with that? Offensive recruiting is I should have let you just answer it. I apologize, but
Oh, no, I mean, I kind of hit on most of it. So,
Here's an interesting one, Ryan. I'm going to address this.
Notre Dame cheat sheet says, would a lot of former Notre Dame players being involved in coaching at the NFL and college levels be a selling point to recruits who want to make football a profession? I mean, I think it depends on who they are, though. I mean,
with some kids, sure. Yeah, with some kids, sure. I don't know that a lot of kids go into college thinking, I want to coach. At least not the big-time recruits. I mean, the big-time recruits are thinking about the NFL, playing in the NFL. I don't think they're going to look.
I took this question a little bit differently. I thought it was saying if you had a lot of former NFL and college coaches on the staff, is that a sell to come play for those guys? Is how I took that question.
Yeah, that would matter to a degree. Yeah, I kind of took it. So your answer is that, and I think that makes sense. My answer, I took it as more of like if there's a bunch of former Notre Dame players that are in coaching, could they sell that? I don't know if that matters a ton as far as like, ooh, look, there's a lot of, you can go there. Because to me, it almost is kind of like, I kind of think for Notre Dame, it would actually lose a little bit of its, hey, our guys don't get into coaching that much unless they really, really love it, because they're too busy making millions, with their business ventures that they got because of that Notre Dame degree. You know what I mean? Like I think, because again, Ryan, it's like everybody wants Notre Dame to do what other teams are doing. It's like, why give up the thing that makes you different? It just makes no sense. Get the football part right. But the other stuff, the 4 for 4, that's the best part of what you have. I mean, yeah. Yep.
And that's not the only pitch, though, I think is what people are missing sometimes in the chat. It's like, that can't be your only pitch. Who said it was their only pitch? It's just part of the pitch.
Right. Exactly. It's just, we're not dealing in reality when it comes to that kind of comment.
Yeah. From Mr. 2.0, it seems to me the common denominator is the administration not fully supporting the football program. At what point does the administration admit that they can do more to help the program and still be Notre Dame?
You know what, Ryan? I'm going to go back to now what I said during the Brian Kelly tenure. I don't want to hear about the administration until the football program is doing everything it can do now under its current circumstances to be successful. Notre Dame did not lose Justin Scott because of anything going on with the administration. Nothing.
Right.
Zero. Right. It wasn't facilities. It wasn't any of that stuff. If they don't get Kingston Viliama-Asa, it has nothing to do with Notre Dame's administration. So are there things the administration needs to do better? Yes. I've had several of my epic rants have been about the administration not doing what it needed to do to support the football program. Absolutely. But I'll say the same thing about this staff that I said about that one, Ryan. Remember the article I wrote where Brian Kelly's complaining about like not having a chef. Not having a chef is why Notre Dame went for 2 against Northwestern when they should have kicked the extra point in 2014, or why they gave a jet sweep to Chris Brown inside the 5-yard line when that kid had never taken a jet sweep in his life in college, right? I mean, it's not why you decided to roll out and throw a deep ball with true freshman Tommy Reese against Tulsa in 2010, right? Like it's not why your team wasn't ready to play against Miami in 2017. It has nothing to do with those things. Fix those things, then you can focus on getting the administration to do their part. And so if I'm an administrator and I'm like, well, hold on a second, you're not doing this, you're not even taking advantage of stuff that we're giving you, right? It's like, if I'm giving you a budget to spend, and for 2-3 years in a row, you go $300,000 under that budget. Year 4, I give you a budget that's more in line with what you've spent. You're not gonna be, well, hold on a second, like, I should get more money. Well, you haven't been spending all that money, right? I mean, so I'm giving you this money and you're not spending it. We need to be able to allocate that in other areas where it's being spent. So, and now if you were to say, hey, look, I'm meeting and you're not getting all the things that I've given you this money to budget, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, then, I don't want to hear it. But if I'm giving you the money and you're doing everything that you need to do, but you just need more because of the circumstance, then okay, cool. You've done everything I've asked you to do. You've done a great job at it. And I need to give you more. You need more to take it to the next level. Then come talk to me. So why would they change when it's the football program's not doing everything they need to do? So yes, the support needs to be better. There's no question. But that's not why you lost Justin Scott. It's not why you're not, you may not get Kingston Viliama-Asa. It's just not. So
it's not. It's not. I mean, long term, it's obviously going to stifle some things. But to your point, it's not this situation, right? Like, we need to isolate the situation and not we can't turn the situation into like the overarching conversation, right? Like, that's kind of the biggest thing for me is that, yes, with some things like coaching hires, for instance, buyouts, that type of stuff. Like, yes, there is administration faults that are happening that can stunt the growth of a program. There's no doubt about it. But that's not why you lost Justin Scott, to your points. It's not why you lost him.
Oh, some of the takes today. Tell you what. All right, let's get down to this one from Andre Tonsel, who always has takes that I like. So thank you, Andre.
Andre says, Mailbag. 1, develop players we have. 2, recruits on a goal in mind. 3, keep grinding on the recruiting trail. 4, have a consistent message.
Yeah, I mean,
all key
absolutely. Points. I mean, yeah. And look what Andre has number 1. That's the key for Notre Dame. I mean, there's nothing more Al Washington can do and Al Golden as well. There's nothing more important that they can do right now for the next 4 months let's see, July, August, September, October, November, 5 months. Then develop the players you already have.
Right.
There's nothing more important than that right now. Do that, and then we can figure that other stuff out later, flat out. Because if you might, man, I screwed up this Justin Scott recruitment. I need to go fix it. And Al Washington did everything he could to fix it. And Notre Dame goes out there and goes 8-4, and the D-line can't get a pass rush. Won't matter.
Right.
Won't matter. If he would have done everything right from the beginning, and Notre Dame got Justin Scott, and they went 8-4, and the D-line couldn't get a pass rush, guess what? Justin's going somewhere else. Right? So right now, that's the priority. Absolutely. Andre nailed it. That's the number one priority right now. And then just stay on, make your changes you need to make, but stay on track. Because they didn't have a great plan with Justin Scott, and it just didn't work. They didn't carry out the plan. That's the problem. So, yes, stay on track, but develop. Simple as that.
I mean, because whether a player's number one priority is academics or the last on their list, the one common denominator for all recruits is that they want to be on a good football team, right? Like that's the end all be all, and that matters.
Yep. All right. Here's a super chat from Aiden Benami.
Aiden, thank you so much. First time super chat, IB Nation. I feel like I'm in the minority of Notre Dame fans who are willing to trust Marcus Freeman and the recruits and evaluate after year 4.
Well, I think when you say evaluate, I think if you're referring to like a big picture evaluation of is this the guy? Yeah, I think year 4 is a safer bet. I've always felt, Ryan, like unless a guy's just tanking, like Ty Willingham was tanking, like I didn't need another year, right? But more often than not, I want to see a guy get to his first full class to be done. I just kind of feel like that's the best way to go, unless he's just really bad. But if you're going to talk about there's 2 types of evaluations. There's that, and then there's evaluating where you are. It's sort of kind of like, Ryan, if you have a job, and we've all had jobs like this. You were a teacher, so I'm pretty sure you had this.
Yeah.
Yes, you get evaluated at the end of the year, but there's always like along the way evaluations.
We had several. Yeah,
right.
We had several evaluations.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what the season is. That's what the recruiting seasons are. That's what the individual seasons are. It's all part of that. And so you're evaluating it from that standpoint of, okay, if Coach Freeman comes out this year and there's certain things that are happening with the football team, and there will be a game this year, Ryan, that Notre Dame is going to play ugly football, and they're going to pull it out at the end. We're going to look at that and say, if this is exactly what happened against Stanford, or this is exactly what happened against Marshall last year, they laid an egg for 3 quarters. But in the 4th quarter, they stepped up. They made the stops on defense. They made the throws they needed to make, and they went and got it done. And we've seen that with some of the better Notre Dame teams. I mean, go look at that Pitt game in 2012 and then the Pitt game in 2018. Right? Notre Dame got outplayed by Pitt in both years until the 4th quarter. The 2018 team is a perfect example. Ian Book sucked for like 3 quarters. Sucked against Pitt in 2018. Go look at what Ian Book did in the 4th quarter of that game, though. He completed something like crazy, like 8 of his last 9 passes, including a touchdown pass to Miles Boykin. And we'll say the 2022 team loses that game. The 2023 team, they made the plays. That comes down to coaching and development, and then players buying into what the coaches are selling. Right, Ryan? I mean, those are things you evaluate. But if they keep losing those games the same way, then you say, hey, look, I know that I got to wait and be patient, but I'm seeing the same stuff I saw last year. So there's always that part of the evaluation as well. So I would look at evaluation really in 2 different ways, in my opinion.
Yep. We had Aiden again with another super chat. Thank you so much. He said, I'm confused why we are recruiting Davis Andrews, who's going on a mission, and not other kids who are actually playing football. Doesn't make sense to me. What they've recruited a lot of other people. They've just missed a lot of safeties in this class. It's kind of that's the full scope of it. I mean,
and then also early on, he wasn't leaning towards taking a mission.
Yeah, that just happened like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. Like that was a pretty
because not every Mormon kid takes a mission before college or during college. Manti never did. Manti didn't take one. Maris Luafau didn't take one. Kona Schwenke didn't take one. So there's been plenty of Mormon kids who don't do that. And I think Kona and Manti and Maris were both Mormon. I could be wrong on Maris. I'm actually not sure if Maris is Mormon, but I'm pretty sure Kona was. But yeah, they didn't take mission. So it's different for every kid, to be honest with you. The circumstances changed. And I'll give Notre Dame credit for that. When they did change, they acted quickly to adjust and focus more on, that's when Oliver Miles became a greater priority and Paul Menke became a greater priority. And they ended up just missing on those guys. But I'll give them that. They did adjust as soon as that became a reality. They did adjust pretty quickly to other guys, Ryan. Would you agree with that? I mean, again, it didn't work out, but I think they moved pretty quickly on that one.
Yeah, and there's no reason that you can't recruit others and also still recruit Davis Andrews because he's a good football player and you would like him in the future of your program, right? Like you don't have to separate the two is kind of my biggest thing.
Right. So yeah, I think they made some good decisions. I think that they just didn't get the job done at the end of the day, right?
I just saw maybe the worst take ever in the chat, man. It's not great.
Oh goodness. Which one?
I don't it's one about Ian Book and Brady Quinn in there.
Oh, I'm not even going there. I will absolutely lose it today. Absolutely lose it today if I have to. Here's one, Ryan. I'll ask you this one. So Nathan Milton asks, what rating do you project for Justin Thurman's senior season? Other than the fact I would say I'm not really worried about his senior season yet because he still has to play his junior season. Right. But let's just focus on junior season. I think that's probably what Nathan meant. So let's go look at junior season now that he's going to be more of the guy.
Yeah, I think Nathan, for me, that kid has all the talent that you need from an athleticism perspective, right? He has the speed, obviously. He has the explosiveness. He's reported to have a high 30 in the vert. He's broad jumped over 10 foot. He's a track kid. He's obviously very explosive on the football field. If he is able to be very productive as much as his talent is indicating and his body develops properly, I think he could be a top 100 recruit when all is said and done. I think he has that type of upside. I mean, the kid, you can't teach the speed and the explosiveness that young man has. You can't. So could he be in a Jeremiah Love area at some point? It's possible, but I think top 100 definitely. I mean, not many kids are as fast and as explosive as that young man is.
Yep. Here's one from Cole Barker. I'll ask this one, Ryan, because I know this is something that you've thought about. So I'll get this last couple. Cole Barker asked, sorry if answered, which we didn't. With Benedict Ume seemingly headed to Stanford, is there a way we jump in on it? Seems he's really high on academics.
Is there a way that you can jump in on it? I mean, Cole, possible, right? I mean, I just think that it comes down to defensive line recruiting. Like, do you want to retrace steps? And if Benedict Ume was a guy that you didn't love, and this is just my perspective on the staff, if they didn't love Benedict Ume, I do not want them to reverse and just go get Benedict Ume to fit a need. I would rather them just evaluate and be patient with this process right now. Because looking back on it, I probably would have kept recruiting Benedict Ume, but I think I may just like him more than the Notre Dame staff a little bit.
Because you and I disagree on that. Like, I'm not as high on him, right? Which happens. I mean, it happens sometimes, right? And I usually don't get too upset about those, Ryan, because unless it's just, wow, you're way off on that one. Like, right. I see where you're coming from on Benedict, and I think you can see where some of my reservations are on Benedict. It's okay. Sure. We can agree to disagree. There are some where you hear somebody say, like, okay, that's just I don't know where you're coming. Like Cole Mullins, when somebody tells me he's a 3-star, I can't have a conversation with you because I just nuts to me. Bryce Young, okay, I understand it. Yeah, he's still very raw. I don't even have him as a 4-star. I have him a 3.5-star right now, right? So I can see that one. But I could also understand why someone may say he's a 4-star because they're looking at the tools and the potential on the upside, right? It's fair conversation to have. And I think that's where Benedict is. I think that the hard thing would be, Ryan, like I think you kind of alluded to this or said it, is you're going to have to now tell a kid that you said no to that you like him now. Like that's why this whole circling back to, like, you all are absolutely right. And I mean, Cole, it's a very fair question. I would ask it if I was in your shoes, right? And I would too. And a lot, what about Jason Robinson and Quasi Gilmer? And all those are very fair questions. But y'all have to remember, Notre Dame basically said no to these kids. Right. Yeah. And so now it's like, no, we were just kidding. That's a hard thing to do. And honestly, when I was 17, 18 years old, I wouldn't have taken that very well. I mean, honestly, I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever you say. Because if you care about academics, I'm going to go to Stanford and play right away and still get a great degree. You
Yeah.
know, so
Everybody's different, but me personally, if a coach passed on me and said I wasn't good enough, or like another guy was better than me, and that's the guy they wanted, and then they tried to circle back, I'd be like, dude, kick rocks. Like, not a chance. Like, not at all. I'm gonna go
right.
beat you now at this point. Like, I'm
Yep.
not doing that. But
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's get to here's kind of this last one, Ryan, that I want to get to.
Okay.
And this is an example of we're just not having like a real conversation here. And
yeah.
this is from number one ND fan, which I part of me wonders if like this is like a troll account or something with the avatar, but it says it can't be your number one emphasis with talking about academics.
Okay.
It can't be your emphasis with your number one emphasis with top 10 kids who aren't planning on staying long enough for a degree. Again, we're not dealing in reality. We're not, because
it's a part of the pitch. It's a part of
so
the pitch.
many. And here's the other thing. So Bryce Young, I believe, from Alabama, got his degree, correct? Didn't Bryce get his degree from Alabama?
He did.
5-star
He graduated in
recruit,
3 years.
top 10 recruit, number one overall draft pick, Heisman Trophy winner, degree recipient.
Yes.
Like most of these kids, a lot of these kids are getting degrees in 3 years.
Yeah. Bryce Young qualified for the Senior Bowl as a true junior, which is pretty crazy.
Because that goes with graduation, correct, Ryan? Like
yes, you have to be graduated if you're a junior. Yep.
So the point is to say Christian Wilkins was at Clemson for 5 years, got 2 degrees.
Yeah.
Right? Like and he was a 5-star recruit. To say that these kids don't care about academics is just wrong. Now, in basketball, that's true. And it's not that kids don't care, Ryan. It's just if I'm as good as I think I am, I'm only in college for really 1 year, kind of. And it's really that first semester. I just got to make sure I stay eligible for the second semester, right? Because these kids aren't good. That's different. Football players have to stay long enough to get a degree if you want one. And the idea that elite players, which are mostly what, Ryan? They look a certain way and they're from a certain part of the country. And there's this notion they don't care about academics. That's just not accurate. The only reason Keon committed to Notre Dame and stayed with Notre Dame as long as he did is because of that.
Yep.
And I can promise you right now, if the football at Notre Dame was even close to Alabama, he's at Notre Dame. That's just a fact. The only reason Caleb Downs made multiple visits to Notre Dame was because of the academics. That's it.
Both his parents are in the education fields. Like, yeah, exactly.
Right. But you couldn't give him what he needed in football. Now, when that changes, like, why did Notre Dame recruit 4 straight number one recruiting classes back in the 80s and 90s? Is it because they stopped asking kids to go to class? Is it because kids back then cared more about academics than they do now? I don't think. I'd actually argue kids nowadays and in this current generation care more about the academics than they did when I first started following recruiting. I would argue that it's actually because kids are more aware now of what's beyond football. They have to sell the football part better.
Yeah.
Sell the football part better and stop selling your academics, and you're going to be back to square one. Same results. Yep. Make the football part better, still sell what makes you unique. The notion that I'm going as Notre Dame, that I'm going to stop selling the best attribute that we have is nonsense to me. You can't sell it and think it's going to be enough. That's the difference. For most kids, it's going to get you in a ball game. Then you have to have something else. What helped with Jaden Greathouse and some of those guys last year is the fact that Coach Stuckey and Coach Reese were selling a new vision so there wasn't like the season of this wasn't very good to work with. So you kind of got away with that a little bit. But there are going to be some kids that buy into that vision. The fact is if you do better in football, you put more kids in the NFL. Why does Notre Dame recruit the offensive line the way it does? Can someone explain that to me? Is there something different about offensive linemen? Yeah, they're a little different. Is there something different about tight ends and offense? No, why? Because they put those kids in the NFL. Hey, guys, it wasn't that long ago Notre Dame struggled to recruit top offensive linemen consistently. Go look at the Charlie Weiss and Ty Willingham era. They got some guys, Sam Young, some guys here and there, but for the Matt Carriufel, but for the most part, they didn't recruit great offensive lines. Why? Because it wasn't O-line U like it was when Harry Hiestand showed up. He made it that way by putting 4 guys into the first round of the NFL draft in like 7 years. Now all of a sudden, Notre Dame's they're starting tight end in the NFL, I believe every year since 1998 has been drafted. Since 2010, no team has had more first, second, and third round players combined go in the first 3 rounds of the draft at tight end than Notre Dame. Nobody.
Yeah.
The next closest is 3. Notre Dame has had 6. So guess what? Notre Dame gets big time tight ends. It's not rocket science, people. And you talked to Nate Roberts. You're going to tell me that the academic piece didn't matter to him? It did.
Oh, man. Big time.
But you know what else mattered? I can get that and
be Michael Mayer.
Here's what you hear from offensive linemen. Here's what you hear from tight ends. I get the best of both worlds in Notre Dame.
Yep.
Right? Here's what you get from cornerbacks recently. I get the best of both worlds in Notre Dame. Defensive linemen can't say that. Right? Quarterbacks can't say that.
Yeah.
Because they're not producing that. So, you know, the fact that that's like Alabama asking Alabama to stop talking about all the titles they've won. That's silly. Why would you stop recruiting the best thing about you? But you just got to make sure you're not getting your brains beat in the other 2 areas. That's the key. Football is important to these kids. It should be. Academics are important to a lot of these. All of them? No. There are some kids in top 10, Ryan, that just do not give 2 rips about academics, and it has nothing to do with how long they're going to stay in school. Stetson Bennett was in school for 7 years, and he got 0 degrees at Georgia, right?
It was 6, but yeah,
it's about how much you value. Do you value it or not? And there are plenty of kids that do. It's just they also understand that I also value that. Mm-hmm. And until Notre Dame can do that, they're always going to come up short with some of these kids. You don't stop selling the best thing you have as a counterweight to that. That is such a bad argument to make. Yeah. You just can't rely on it as the only thing you're selling. That's the difference, right?
It's the absoluteness, right? It's like, oh, all Notre Dame sells is academics. It's like, no, that's not actually a true statement. Right. So yeah, cool, man. Cool. But yeah. It's going to appeal to the players that care most about it. And you still have other parts of the pitch that will appeal to other players. Like it's not absolute. Right. Like people try to make it act like it is.
Right. And that's the thing is we're just too many shallow arguments. And that's the thing is for me to say all these kids care about academics, that's just nonsense because they don't.
Yeah. And
if you sold this better, you'd get all these. I'm not saying that, but it's also just as equally wrong to say none of them do or most of them don't. There's no proof in that. Because, and how do I know? It's not the schools they choose. It's what they do when they're there. Bryce Young had 0 motivation from a football standpoint to graduate in 3 freaking years with very high academic standards. It wasn't like just that Bryce Young graduated in 3 years, Ryan. He thrived academically in 3 years.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the difference. Why? What was the reason why, Ryan? There was nothing in it for him to do that from a football standpoint. Because that's just who he is. That's how he was raised.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, and so why did he go to Alabama? Same reason Jimmy Clausen picked Notre Dame. Right? I mean, it's as simple as that. So I guess the reason it matters, Ryan, is because if you're Notre Dame, you can't fix the problem if you can't properly address it.
Right.
Right? You got to know what the problem is to actually be able to fix it. That's basically what it comes down to for me.
Yep.
So, all right, Ryan, that's going to do it. That's going to do it for today's show. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yep. We appreciate everyone. We know that this podcast had a little bit of negativity at times, but it was the real world that we have to talk about a little bit, but we appreciate everybody. We had 600 plus consistently throughout this entire podcast. So before you go, if you could just hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, notification bell, as you'll obviously know when we're going to be popping up with another show. Back tonight, 6:00 Eastern time for IB Nation Sports Talk. So make sure you come back to the show for that. But Ryan Roberts, Brian Driscoll, appreciate everybody. Also go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. We have a lot of intel that we're going to continue to put out as we get closer and closer to the season. We're only 50-something days away from football now, college football, which is absolutely incredible. So smash that like button. Thank you all so much. We'll be back again with you all very soon on the Notre Dame Recruiting Hour, a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.